Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the 6th annual partners meeting of the iStrategy. I see that we're over 100 people online, so this seems like a good time to start. I am Shagun Khare. I'm from the WHO Department of Communications, working specifically on emergency communications, including yellow fever. So it's my great pleasure to be with you here today and to welcome you to this meeting. Most importantly, how do you listen to this meeting? We have interpretation available. You can choose your language. There's a button at the bottom of the screen, so you can choose between English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. And as our interpreters have a tough job ahead of them, please speak as slowly and as clearly as you can so that as many people can understand as possible. This is a special meeting today because we're at the midpoint of the iStrategy. It's a 10-year strategy and we're meeting at the mid-year. So this is going to be an important moment to take stock of the progress that's been made and the challenges that lie ahead. One of the most important things for the success of this meeting is going to be your participation. So we hope to have you join in on questions and answers, leave them in the chat box or raise your hands. We have plenty of spaces for people to ask their questions to the speakers today. There will be all the presentations made available. I know this is a very popular question, so all the presentations will be shared in a link and somebody will be dropping that in the chat for you to access. So I think with that, we can start the meeting. And I believe we begin with a welcome message from Dr. Sosefal, who's the Assistant Director General of Emergency Response here at WHO.
Dear partners, dear colleagues, welcome to the 6th annual meeting of the iStrategy. The iStrategy program is crucial to move towards the elimination of yellow fever epidemics. It also contributes to make millions of people safer by ensuring universal access to yellow fever immunization so that every person in yellow fever at-risk countries is protected against the disease. Since the inception of the iStrategy, 187 million people have been vaccinated in 15 countries, and an additional 57 million people are expected to be vaccinated by end of this year. However, there is still a target of 235 million people to be vaccinated in Africa by 2026. The program has also contributed to substantial progress in terms of diagnostic and laboratory capacity. As you may know, the iStrategy is hosted within the WHO Emergency Response Division that I'm leading and is under the Health Emergency Intervention Department HEA and the High Impact Epidemics Unit for several strategical reasons. First, the HEA department provides a unique field network and understanding of realities on the ground, especially regarding hard-to-reach population and vulnerable settings where tailored approaches are needed. Second, being in the department enhances exposure and linkages across the organization with other networks like the GON and provide ability to leverage outbreak as opportunity to identify and accelerate preventive measures. Third, disease like yellow fever has the potential to spread rapidly, like the alarming situation we face with cholera outbreaks reported in around 29 countries. Therefore, it is important to respond immediately and in a coordinated manner to contain rapidly outbreaks and reduce the risk of dissemination. As the current multi-country cholera outbreak, we should expect more yellow fever outbreaks in more countries. So it is critical to anticipate and implement preparedness and prevention intervention. This perfectly illustrates that the iStrategy is not only about outbreak response, but also aimed to protect at-risk population and prevent international spread. Now we need to foster political engagement and accelerate implementation of the iStrategy 23-24 based on prioritized recommendations from the midterm evaluation. Stronger engagement is needed at all levels of the partnership in the following critical areas: multi-age, multi-antigen catch-up vaccination campaign to fill coverage gap, build urban resilience to mitigate urban risk and international spread, provision of bundled services for hard-to-reach population and communities for equity and efficiency, elevate profile of yellow fever as priority antigen and routine immunization strengthening. Additionally, innovation should be a priority and should be integrated with risk-based approach, for example, to protect the workers in mining areas. Even if vaccination supply has increased by 57% since 2017, I strongly encourage vaccine providers and global health partners to increase vaccine production. Funding mechanisms should also be improved to enable the most vulnerable countries to provide yellow fever vaccine through routine immunization. Let me end by thanking you all for your invaluable contribution and continued engagement. If you want the I strategy to be successful and meet the objective, we all need to count on it and lead this program. Wishing you a great meeting and looking forward to receiving your recommendation to make this strategy a success.
Thank you for that video from Dr. Sosefal, who's the Assistant Director General at WHO, the Assistant Director General for Emergency Response. With that, we'll now move on to the lead of the I Secretariat, who's right next to me, Laurence Sivrelius, for an update on the activities over the last year. Over to you, Laurence.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It really is a pleasure to discuss with you where we stand as a global yellow fever community and where to go next. This presentation will focus on the key achievements, on emerging issues and opportunities to address. There will be further details provided by colleagues from the working groups, the regions, countries, and partners throughout the 2 days of the meeting. I really want to start by acknowledging and appreciating the work done. We're still on the title slide, the work done across the partnership and within the Secretariat in 2022. This year, what alluded to is mark the entry of the I strategy in its second half. And it's also the year of the independent midterm evaluation, which was done via the evaluation offices of WHO, Gavi, and UNICEF. The vision is indeed a stock-taking exercise and opportunity to learn lessons and adjust as necessary. I think that's very exciting to us as a partnership, and I really want to thank all those who provided insight. I also want to say a few words of appreciations of the colleagues who are pursuing new endeavors. Richard Mihigo and Ambrose Tolisuna from AFRO, Judith Salemarian and Chris Gregory from UNICEF HQ, and Ngum Mezong from the I Secretariat. I also want to welcome new colleagues, Dick Chalma and Ado Bwaka from AFRO, working under the leadership of Abdou Salam Gay, the Regional Emergency Director, and Benido Impuma. I also want to welcome Modibo Kasogi and Sanjay Pardwaj from UNICEF Program Division. And last but not least, welcome Maria Vragno from the I Secretariat. I do apologize if I've missed people. If so, please introduce yourselves. Moving on to the next slide, please. The I partnership is resilient and successful. The governance and engagement mechanisms established function. We have standardized our approaches for risk and data-informed decisions. The regional implementation is steered by focal persons in affected regions. We have 4 people, dedicated full-time yellow fever people in Afro, and Blaise Batonoli is sitting next to me, and 1 in Paho. There is continued engagement with the global arboviral initiatives and the IA 2030, and we're seeking to expand those to other areas of work as relevant. We have continued advocacy and outreach efforts for awareness raising and to create the sense of a global yellow fever community. And through the year, we also continue to build capacity and share information and knowledge with new and mature products and platforms, which I do encourage you to consult. The laboratory capacity has also continued to increase, underpinned by enhancing mechanisms to accelerate the transport time from regional to regional reference lab for confirmation. Next slide, please. About 180 million people have been protected against yellow fever for life via campaigns completed since the inception of the eye strategy. And this year, Congo was the fourth country to achieve nationwide protection. By year end, if things go according to plan, campaigns will have continued or been launched in 3 countries, high-risk countries, of which 2 are no-grade countries. And since eye inception, 2 new countries now have nationwide routine immunization. This does leave, however, 7 countries yet to initiate campaigns, of which 2, Ethiopia and South Sudan, are also yet to introduce routine immunization. I want to flag that Chad and Niger have taken and are taking steps towards Gavi application for preventive campaigns and sub-national risk assessment with the eye strategy risk analysis working group. And I want to highlight as well that Ethiopia undertook national sub-risk analysis and with a now need to ensure strong linkages to the full portfolio planning. Next slide, please. This means that by year end, again, if campaigns happen according to plan, 244 million people are currently expected to have been protected against yellow fever via campaign since eye inception. That is 16 countries with campaigns, including 18 preventive mass vaccination campaigns in 6 countries and 29 reactive vaccination campaigns supported by the ICG in 14 countries, including Brazil. This does mean that the original midterm milestones of 239 million people protected by the end of year 2022 is likely to be met despite a pandemic. Obviously, some numbers are still preliminary and further delays may happen, particularly in light of the ongoing Ebola crisis in Uganda. But these figures are such, and I'm sorry you may not fully see the chart on the slide, but these figures are such that even if we do not make the milestone by year end, it will be by a very small margin, and the milestone is very likely to be met early in 2023. So I really want to pause on these figures and applaud the countries, the regions, and the partners for their engagement and making this possible. I also really want to insist on the critical role played by yellow fever vaccine manufacturers and the eye and demand supply group in enabling an increase and sustained vaccine supply. 465 million doses were procured since eye inception, with a supply multiplied by 57%. I also want to flag on this graph that the original target was based on the needs identified in 2017. That means that it does not account for the growing immunity gaps, which have led to the resurgence of yellow fever outbreaks. And so the needs for the remainder of the strategy are likely greater. Next slide, please. This timelines with which you may be familiar already describes the plan for preventive campaigns and routine immunization through 2024. They reflect the pace we need to keep up to achieve the 2026 goals, with plans for Nigeria to achieve nationwide protection in 2024, and DRC in 2025. I want to reiterate here the continued risks associated with the absence of nationwide protection and encourage countries and regions to pursue this goal as actively as possible. A call to partners as well. to also increase engagements towards supporting countries where financial barriers to large-scale implementation exist, regardless of Gavi eligibility, with support through advocacy on the importance of optimal yellow fever protection and through support to mobilize or optimize resources. I think it's important that we create a dialogue. I understand the extent to which we can support. The ICE partnership has a resource mobilization strategy, which is available to all for use, but we did have difficulties characterizing the needs at country level. Next slide, please. And looking at the other regional milestones, further exemplifies the scale of the efforts undertaken, as with the exceptions of the yellow fever routine immunization, the milestones set through 2022 were or are being achieved. But these are, again, initial targets. They were critical indeed at the beginning of the strategy to inform and drive the initial efforts of the partnership to resume campaigns, introduce into routine and improve confirmation capacity. On the lab front, nuances were added through the initial half of the strategy as needs were better characterized. But beside that, the milestones have not been revisited, and they do not account for the full scope of work that we defined together in 2016, nor for the emerging needs, such as addressing of the growing immunity gaps in situations of underperforming RI. And this last point, I believe, is very important, given its direct impact on our capacity to indeed eliminate yellow fever epidemics. These gaps are associated with the resurgence of yellow fever outbreaks, which began in late 2020 and continued through 2022. We'll see more on the next slide, please. Since late 2022, with the outbreaks in Senegal and Guinea, and through late 2020, sorry, with the outbreaks in Senegal and Guinea, and through 2022, we have faced the greatest extent and intensity of yellow fever transmission in over 20 years, with confirmed and probable cases reported in 15 countries. Specifically, since late 2020, there has been 11 outbreaks, of which 7 were disruptive, and of which 7 were in countries with history of preventive campaigns. And these are the countries with the dark outline. And among the outbreaks that occurred in countries with history of campaigns, all but 1 were disruptive. There were also high concerns about urban risks in areas like Lagos or Abidjan. These outbreaks that we faced over the last 2 years are linked to immunity gaps associated with suboptimal vaccine coverage, which worsened during the COVID-19 pandemic. But as also reflected in the geographies presented in this map, we also see that there is an underlying issue of fragility, of challenged resources and health system, of insecurity, of vulnerable and hard to reach communities, and of population mobility. It took a whole incident management support team and 7.8 million doses to contain these outbreaks. Next slide, please. They actually were also very challenging from an operational standpoint, with long and complex investigations and response, as reflected in the different timelines that are shown here. On average, these timelines were higher this year than in any of the last 4 years, with an average of 204 days from symptom onset of the index case to response. These timelines were higher than in 2020, during the first year of the pandemic, which had an average time of 189 days. So what do these timelines reflect? They reflect challenges with investigation and response capacity, with resources, and with prioritization of yellow fever. The challenges are also exemplified in the difficulties encountered to use these investigations and these response as opportunities to further increase their relevance for root cause analysis, needs assessment, to provide bundled services or address underlying issues, and these despite the availability of some financial resources. But I want to remark that Chad and Niger, out of these outbreaks, engage in work towards subnational risk assessments and Gavi applications. But these challenges that we've described are really calling for continued high level of advocacy toward using these outbreaks as opportunities, but also ensuring that we as at partnership level, have dedicated people with a relevant weight and mandate that can support countries in this specific endeavor. This could be mobile regional staff, possibly primarily based in the no regret country. This could also be an optimized network of regional partners with a mandate that is clearly communicated to countries across the region for a better uptake. Next slide, please. I think it's important that we carefully take stock of these situations and challenges, as if we overlay the latest WINIC estimates with a history of yellow fever preventive campaigns, combined with the fact that 48% of the cases of yellow fever in 2021 and 2022 were under 20, there is a high likelihood that we'll see more of these outbreaks as yellow fever circulations intensifies and spills over to underprotected populations with risk of introduction into urban settings. Next slide, please. I want to really insist on the issue of vaccination gaps leading to outbreaks, which threaten the elimination of yellow fever epidemics and derail efforts. The graph to your left reflects the intensity of yellow fever virus circulations in the countries with the highest endemic risk and that were targeted by the Yellow Fever Initiative. And this graph is really to show the risks associated with the resurgence of outbreaks in West and Central African countries with history of campaigns. Please note that the Angola and DRC outbreaks are not reflected on this left graph because they didn't benefit from a large-scale campaign at the time. The graph to the right reflects the number of outbreaks in Africa since our inception in 2017. And kindly please note the different time spans of the two graphs, with the right hand graph partly overlapping with the most recent data of the left graph, which runs through 2021. So what do we see in recent history? We see an important and recurring outbreak activities in the country with ongoing large-scale vaccination campaign under eye, namely that was Nigeria, showing in blue. And Nigeria has absorbed 90% of the supply available for Africa through a series of subnational increments based on risk at national and regional level. And that was to seek the maximum returns in terms of people protection against yellow fever. And you see that Nigeria has not reported outbreaks in 2021 and 2022, but I want to highlight that the risk persists, particularly in urban settings, as and Lagos in particular, how the country works towards achieving nationwide protection. In this graph, we also see outbreaks occurring in high-risk countries which have not yet engaged in preventive mass vaccination campaigns, and they are shown in orange. They signal indeed a persistent risk, not only at country level, but also at regional level in case of spread, and at strategic level vis-à-vis our capacity to eliminate yellow fever epidemics. And the last element we see is outbreaks in countries with history of campaigns, and these are the red bars. These outbreaks represent a continued threat who risk to derail the program and efforts, and they are also a strong warning regarding the efforts that are currently ongoing under eye in Nigeria, DRC, or soon Uganda, for instance, where the massive investments currently done for people protection could be jeopardized should no action be taken to address the routine immunization performance and associated immunity gaps. With a better understanding of the reasons or the causes of the difference in coverage observed between measles and yellow fever, with, I think, the vaccine delivery working group playing a key critical role on the latter. The data that we see show that to be successful at eliminating yellow fever epidemics, we need to continue rolling the campaigns in the highest risk countries. We need to launch those efforts, preventive campaigns and routine immunization alike, in the high-risk countries that have not yet done so. And we also need to catch up the immunity gaps that jeopardize community protection and lead to avoidable outbreaks. I think the data is here. We need to refine and details those elements, but we need to detail what the investment case and the options to address would be. But the evidence of the need for action and decision-making is here. And I think this information calls for making adjustments and trying out approaches to close immunity gaps. Just as we advance our thinking, and we'll do so collectively at partnership level, I think the case can be made that planned catch-up campaigns have a much greater likelihood of being used as opportunities and of integrations with other efforts than emergency outbreak response campaigns, particularly in challenge settings. Next slide, please. I want also to insist on an element that we see recurring, which is a challenge to optimally bridge the last link to the field, to decision makers and users, communities. And we are successfully rolling out large-scale efforts over an extended period. Yet we have challenges transforming these efforts into something even more relevant. We've highlighted challenges to fully maximize the impact of the efforts undertaken to build capacity or roll out vaccines. We've also had challenges documenting and disseminating lessons learned from the field on a systematic manner and adjusting practices accordingly. And to some extent, I would say the same may apply to resource mobilization efforts and our limited capacity thus far to alleviate some of the financial barriers. I would like to ask countries, regions, and partners of, what else we can do to bridge this last link. Is it fostering trainings and peer-to-peer learning? Is it via rolling out the learning strategy? Is it via developing a network or a roster of yellow fever and eye experts that could, from existing resources, that could go from countries to countries and help them as the needs emerge? And I'm really keen to hear from all of you of how we could do this better, and importantly, which role you would like to play in this. I think it likely comes down to an issue of engagement, advocacy, and recognition of the stakes associated with yellow fever, and of having people in the ground in key organizations to sustain attention, coordinate efforts, and drive them forward at the relevant level. I think that to seize opportunities more, it is important to bring in new angles and networks that can also support us in the implementation. At this stage, I'd like to advocate to have eye specialists or resource persons in no-regret countries to amplify the impact of eye endeavors, and these people, as mentioned, could deploy from there to support others. I'd like also to hear thoughts from the regional colleagues on the value of engagement workshops and regular reporting to the regional committee and member states. I'd also like to call on to partners so that the yellow fever conversation happens is on many forums as possible. We'll be successful, I believe, with a sustained, conscious and concerted efforts. And as you see on the next slide, I strongly believe that we're all partners and we all co-own the strategy. We own it all together. Lastly, I want to briefly update on the strategic priorities for the eye secretariat. That will be on the next slide. As the situation stabilizes, the previous, please. As the situation stabilizes, the eye secretariat will focus on the priorities that were identified last year, that remain current, and will advance in 2023, particularly on the work of innovations, which was delayed. So we continue to play our role of driving the development of action plan and coordinating the global yellow fever community. Will provide advocacy, technical assistance, resource mobilization support, with the support on the acceleration of campaigns in the 3 no regrets countries, continued work on addressing and mitigating urban risk, as well as improving outbreak response, and associated to that, improving patients' outcomes through clinical management. I think it's important that we also continue in advanced thinking on innovative ways to address immunity gaps based on evidence and operational research, and to engage with the private sectors to protect high-risk workers. It's important as well that we enhance and sustain partnership-wide collaboration and synergies with other initiatives, such as the IA 2030, the measles programs, or the Global Arboviral Initiative. And we'll heard from the IA 2030 and the GLI directly from the leads through this meeting. And I also do believe that we should engage more with other partners as relevant, and foster engagements between countries and regions. With that, I will end the I-Secretariat presentation. I do wish us a successful meeting, and thank you very much for your partnership. Merci beaucoup pour votre engagement dans la stratégie I.
Thank you very much, Laurence. That was a great scene setting for our discussions. It's really quite commendable, all the successes that have been made despite the pandemic, I have to say. And I think part of the reason for those successes is the I strategy and all the work you do to coordinate and shape the global response. So great job to everybody, despite the challenges, of course. And we'll be discussing some more of those. For our colleagues who have just joined, we have interpretation available. There are a number of languages available: English, Spanish, French, Arabic, Portuguese. You'll find the button at the bottom of your screens. So please do choose the language that suits you the best. And if you had questions for Laurence, please drop them in the chat and we can ask her these questions during the Q&A session later. With that, we'll move on to the next segment, which is presentations and discussions on the work of the working groups. So we'll start with a video on the Lab Technical Working Group to discuss what this year has been like for them. Could we have the video, please?
Dear colleagues, it is a real honor for me to provide you an update from the Laboratory Technical Working Group on advances in strengthening yellow fever diagnostics. So my name is Jeff Lemaire. I'm the Global Yellow Fever Laboratory Network Coordinator, and I'm presenting on the behalf of the entire Laboratory Technical Working Group. So as you know, the Laboratory Technical Working Group is working along the other working group to advise the I strategy in close collaboration with our regional offices, as well as all the countries providing the delivery. We are very, very lucky to have the active contribution for a numerous number of experts from institutions all around the world, including in Latin America, North America, Europe, Africa, as well as very good engagement from UNICEF, Gavi, as well as WHO from regional and headquarter level. Some of the key highlights since our last partners meeting portray to a number of different areas. In terms of network coordination, we managed to secure funding and support to the 3 regional reference laboratories in Africa. However, we did face some HR gaps across various labs, part of the African Yellow Fever Lab Network. And we also had challenge where we have seen for a specific moment 2 out of the 3 regional reference laboratories that experienced cell culture contamination. But despite all this, we were able to show that our lab network demonstrate very good resilience. We did some progress in commercial kit performance evaluation with the publication of the WHO public report, as well as a scientific publication on the Altona molecular RT-qPCR assay. And we will be publishing a second expression of interest to have more competitors and manufacturers that are producing RT-qPCR assay to submit their dossier for review. We have also evaluated two additional IgM serology assay, one being the ATCC MAC-HD ELISA assay, and another one being the SD Biosensor Standard Q lateral flow assay or rapid test. Those two latter products has been undergoing independent evaluation, and we will soon have a formal consultation within the Lab Technical Working Group for them to advise on recommendation for use. We do expect all of this to be completed before the end of the year. In the last 12 months, we have also performed our first serology EQA program, where we were able to assess the entire laboratories in our network. And that assessment was conducted by the Robert Koch Institute in collaboration with WHO headquarters, regional offices, US CDC, and the entire Lab Technical Working Group. Such report is under finalization as we speak. We also make good progress on the Biomex Vaccine project, which is aiming at biobanking large volume of characterized sera. So we have 200 fractions from 10 different vaccines that were collected over 10 weeks, of follow-up. And the characterization of such sera is currently undergoing by Institut Pasteur Dakar, and we hope to be able to complete the characterization and biobank before the end of the year. We have managed to provide, despite COVID restriction, a number of hands-on training, both in the African as well as the region of the Americas, and we have also supported the introduction and assay validation of the new Altona RT-qPCR assay in several countries. We're looking at also supporting information dissemination, and we do have good progress made on the revision of the yellow fever laboratory manual. We do expect the full content to be finalized by the end of this year, with publication early next year. We've also worked on establishing a new website dedicated to the yellow fever diagnostic or laboratories, which is called iLabs. And we are hoping to launch the public-facing version of the website by the end of the year and continue working on additional functions next year. The IOPS program has supported international transportation, simple transportation, and helping really in speeding up case confirmation. We shifted in terms of procurement from the WHO procurement to the UNICEF procurement of reagent bundle, which have now been delivered across all 21 countries. We also have included the addition of the new commercial assays to the list. Gavi provided a commitment for yellow fever molecular and new serology diagnostics support for the 2023 period, and it was approved by Gavi board. And in terms of research and development, we're making good progress on different projects, which hopefully I'll be able to update you next year. Just in a snapshot, here are different products that we have been working on developing and finalizing over the last 12 months, which includes the yellow fever testing algorithms, the independent kit performance evaluation, as well as some training materials, the website, and the external quality assessment report, and some progress on the yellow fever manual. I'd like to really thank the active participation of all the Laboratory Technical Working Group members, obviously Gavi for their financial support, and really all the different centers of excellence that we are working closely on a day-to-day basis. On that, I thank you, and I wish you a very good end of meeting.
Thank you. That was a video message from Jeff Lemaire, who's with the Laboratory Technical Working Group of the eye strategy. Next, we'll move to vaccines, and I welcome Cassandra Quintanilla, who is the chair of the Vaccines Working Group, to speak about what their experience has been.
Thank you so much. So I'll present an overview of the Vaccine Delivery Working Group on behalf of all the group. I am the co-chair alongside Carol Tevi from WHO. So next slide, please. So the Vaccine Delivery Working Group, as you saw on the previous video, is part of the multiple working groups that are part of the governance structure of the eye strategy. In particular, our working group actually sits more closely in the strategic objective 1, which is to protect at-risk populations. Based on that, our mandate is to increase vaccine demand and population immunity by strengthening routine immunization. And for 2022, we identified 3 key priority areas under this strategic objective. First, the identification and resolution of barriers to yellow fever routine introduction and optimal immunization coverage. Some of the key activities included identify some of the barriers for optimal campaign coverage, to provide, based on that, provide recommendations on some coverage improvement activities that would be tailored to some of the key countries in a final report, as well as to understand the vaccination coverage from the routine in a final report. Our second priority area is to support yellow fever high-risk countries through technical assistance. Technical assistance in this case for 2022, we focused on some key priority countries, namely Uganda, since they were planning to introduce in their routine, as well as Nigeria, DRC, Gabon, and Guinea-Bissau, more aligned towards their preventive mass campaign activities. So the idea was for this working group to support in the mapping of the needs and to facilitate the provision of these needs by all of the partners. And the third priority area is the operational research to strengthen yellow fever immunization practices. This is meant to provide some technical guidance as well to the countries based on some of the findings. So we can actually reach some of the key objective overall. So in terms of key activities, we have the provision of a survey to assess the potential demand of 5-dose vials for yellow fever, and based on that, produce a report that could then yield some guidance on a future assessment between 5-dose vial and 10-dose vials based on each context criteria, as well as to do a research report on some of the key mechanisms that would lead to high yellow fever and measles vaccination coverage. We're talking here in particular about the differential between yellow fever and measles, since we see that as a key focus where we can recognize that some of the potential issues for low yellow fever coverage are yellow fever specific beyond system-wide when we see this gap between yellow fever and measles coverage. So those are some of the key activities that we outlined for 2022 and that we try to move forward. Next slide. Now going through each of the priority areas, we can see that for the first one, there were a lot of competing priorities that delayed some of the process. However, there's still a final draft available in this report on the barriers for optimal yellow fever coverage. So the final report is available, is currently under review, that then would need to be validated by the working group before making it available more widely. And of course, when we're talking about barriers for routine introduction, we cannot skip the fact that indeed Uganda did introduce yellow fever into their routine, which was a huge milestone for the eye strategy as a whole, since now we only have 2 more high-risk countries that are pending to apply and introduce for yellow fever routine. So moving forward, we expect to finalize the report on the barriers for optimal coverage and pinpoint some of the improvement strategies that then could be socialized to learn from some of these lessons and improve all of their routine throughout the high-risk countries. Our second priority area is to support yellow fever high-risk countries through technical assistance. Some of the challenges that we saw this year in order to complete as planned the activities was one, indeed, competing priorities for optimal coordination. This technical assistance really requires a strong coordination between country, regions, and as well as any other actors that would be facilitating financing and technical assistance. And so competing priorities at all levels made this coordination a little bit more complex. And as well, one of the key avenues for technical assistance is through Gavi TCA. And the mechanism to access this TCA actually changed this year, which in the long term, it would be much better because it is now a multi-year TCA. And so countries would be able to plan more long-term in sharing their priorities. But of course, any change of mechanism can present some challenges in socializing this information and getting the right priorities surfaced by countries. Nonetheless, there were some key accomplishments under this priority area. As I mentioned, Uganda indeed introduced in their routine and they're planning to start their mass campaign. And so there is technical assistance for their mass campaign included as part of their operational cost support provided by Gavi, as well as some key activities included in the multi-year plan for technical assistance that are geared towards improvement of routine coverage, as well as immunization surveillance for yellow fever. Moving forward, we need to continue the monitoring of the mass campaigns that will be ongoing in 2023 in Uganda, Nigeria, and DRC, and support these countries with any gaps in their technical assistance that they might need to fulfill these activities, as well as streamline moving forward the mission reports for all of the focal points towards the key priority countries to try to really have that lessons learned be much more systematic in the provision of technical assistance. Next slide. The third and final priority area for our working group is operational research to strengthen yellow fever immunization practices. As part of this priority, like I mentioned, there was the launch of a survey to countries at risk of yellow fever to better understand potential demand for 5-dose vial and how that could fit within their own country context. Some of the challenges were some delays in the country responses for this survey. However, as of now, I'm glad to report that we have around 96% response rate on the survey. And so that report will move forward. And as soon as the final product, the final analysis and the report is validated through all the partners, that can actually be made available. Regarding the other research that was part of this priority area. Currently, the protocol data collection and the facilitation guide have been prepared, and that would allow us to understand some of the key mechanisms that could lead to a high yellow fever and measles vaccine coverage. And in addition to that, beyond what was already outlined as the key activities, there's an additional activity, which is an analysis and a report on urban and rural measles and yellow fever differentials using DHS and the mixed surveys. So that is the first phase is complete, and it's undergoing final review by the leading partner on this area, which is UNICEF. So moving forward, as you see, even though some of this work is ongoing, the idea is to really have the reports finalized, validated in order to be disseminated, and the key learnings absorbed by all of the relevant countries. Certainly, we're expecting the full report of the 5-dose vials expected early in 2023. that would be followed by the publication of yellow fever coverage in the second year of life platform. Regarding the study, as a next step, there's the exploration of potentially Cameroon being the first country to have this study. And then with these results, ideally, we would be able to assist other countries in targeting key issues that are having this differential between yellow fever and measles coverage. And overall, we still have pending our annual meeting for the vaccine delivery working group, where we need to validate some of the key findings from this operational research before we can move forward on with the next steps. Next slide. And just to give you a quick overview on some of the initial findings based on the latest WINIC report, I wanted to give you an overview on of this preliminary analysis to assess yellow fever coverage in 2021, specifically looking at the differentials between measles first dose and yellow fever. Next slide. So in 22 countries in Africa, there was this assessment to try to understand the levels of yellow fever coverage compared to their measles first dose coverage. If you can see here on the top of the graph, that is coverages as of 2020, and the bottom graph is coverage as of 2021. Overall, we see that between 2020 and 2021, yellow fever coverage improved in 8 countries, and measles first dose coverage improved in all countries except in Angola. However, we still see a bit of backsliding because between 2020 and 2021, yellow fever coverage dropped in 6 countries compared to our baseline of 2019 levels before the COVID pandemic. Next slide. Now, a similar analysis, if we look at the countries at risk of yellow fever in the Americas, we see that yellow fever coverage improved in 8 countries in 2021 compared to 2020. And in particular for countries that have co-administration of measles first dose and yellow fever, all of them improved, in particular Suriname. However, similar to the previous slide in the African region, we still see some backsliding where the coverage of yellow fever in 2021 dropped in 6 countries compared to 9 based on the coverage of 2019. Among these countries, we see the largest gap between measles first dose and yellow fever in Brazil and Peru. Both of them do not co-administer these 2 antigens. Next slide. Yep. So overall, even though we have seen slight improvements in coverage of yellow fever for both the African and Americas region, we see that we're still not at the level of 2019. And in some countries, there's still a continuous decline. That's why this analysis that is part of the vaccine delivery working group, we believe it's quite important because it would give us a little bit more of an insight on exactly what are the countries and what could be the possible reasons behind this backsliding, so we can trigger some very targeted actions to improve coverage, not only to the levels of 2019, but also to a level that is optimal based on what is recommended in the ICE strategy. Thanks.
Thank you, Cassandra, for that. I will have to ask the next speakers to maintain the time limit. We have about 5 minutes for each presentation. So with that very interesting presentation, thank you. We move on to the next speaker, who is from the risk analysis group. We have Nicole Lindsay from the US CDCs. Thank you.
Hi, I don't think I see my slides. There we go. Thank you. Yes, my name is Nicole Lindsay. I'm with US CDC and happy to be able to provide an update for the risk analysis working group on behalf of all of my colleagues. Next slide, please. So the primary objectives of our working group are to develop evidence-informed approaches to assess yellow fever risk between and within countries, and to provide objective input to support operational planning and prioritize campaign timing between countries and at subnational levels. Next slide, please. We've been able to complete a number of activities this year, and perhaps most importantly, we updated the national risk scores for countries in the African region in July to inform vaccine allocations for 2023. This slide reviews the current components of the National Risk Assessment Tool. Those really fall into three general categories: endemic risk, epidemic risk, and mitigation. Endemic risk measures baseline yellow fever virus activity and includes data on confirmed cases as well as land cover data used as a surrogate for the presence of non-human primates and endemic mosquito vectors. Epidemic risk measures the risk of virus amplification and includes data such as presence of epidemic mosquito vectors, population density, healthcare infrastructure, and population movement, with specific focus on the introduction of non-immune populations. The last category, mitigation, reflects the estimated population protection from previous vaccination activities, both routine EPI coverage as well as preventive and reactive campaigns. Mitigation scores are negative, so vaccination coverage decreases the overall measure of risk. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes some of the key changes in risk determinants from the previous assessment conducted in June of 2021 to the update conducted in June 2022. The endemic risk scores were adjusted as yellow fever cases were reported from 10 countries. Epidemic scores were adjusted to account for some updated documentation of Aedes aegypti in 12 countries and population density increases in 10 countries. Mitigation scores were updated for Chad, where reactive vaccination campaigns occurred, and Nigeria, where EPI coverage improved. Overall, the national coverage rates were relatively stable. Unfortunately, we still had 19 countries with vaccination coverage under 80%. Next slide, please. The changes to the data inputs resulted in substantial risk rating increases for Kenya, Chad, and the Central African Republic. The recent resurgence of yellow fever cases that has already been discussed was the primary driver for change in all of those countries. Democratic Republic of Congo and Ghana also had notable increases in risk scores, but those changes did not significantly alter their risk ranking among other countries. Next slide, please. This slide just summarizes some of the additional activities that our working group has completed this year. We worked with country colleagues in Ethiopia to conduct a subnational risk assessment to inform their Gavi application. Through this work with Ethiopia, we identified some additional considerations for future assessments related to customization of the tool to account for locally available data and local needs, and also develop some tools to assist other countries that might implement an assessment in the coming years. We have also published an article on the resurgence of yellow fever in the African region. The paper was published recently in MPJ Vaccine with the purpose of highlighting recent outbreaks and the importance of maintaining high vaccine coverage in at-risk countries. Next slide, please. This slide just summarizes some of our current and planned priority activities for the coming year. We are collaborating with some colleagues at Imperial College to develop models to assess risk of yellow fever virus spreading to moderate risk countries in the Eastern Mediterranean region. We are engaging with country colleagues in Chad on a subnational risk assessment to support a future Gavi proposal, and are discussing vaccination strategies for Kenya with partners. In addition, we are working with a consultant to develop a yellow fever vaccination heat map to help visualize vaccine coverages between and within countries, and to help identify crucial immunity gaps. We are also continuing to coordinate with partners in the American regions regarding their risk assessment needs, and perhaps further tool development. So next slide. I just wanted to close by thanking all the members of the Risk Analysis Working Group for their contributions. And that completes my slides. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation, and thank you for keeping time. With that, we go to the last presentation in this session, which is from Hans Christiansen from UNICEF, who will speak about the work of the Demand and Supply Working Group. Over to you, Hans.
Thank you, dear colleagues and partners. My also short presentation will focus on the activities and from the Demand and Supply Working Group. We'll walk through some numbers on historic supply and projected future availability. And lastly, I will leave you with some key messages. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. The Demand and Supply Working Group includes colleagues from various departments and offices in Gavi, in WHO, in UNICEF, BMGF, and the I Secretariat. Through the list of activities here, we operationalize the vaccine allocation. We enable country planning for yellow fever immunization activities, and we share data and information around vaccine demand and supply. The group supported the development of the first edition of the preventive campaign calendar for preventive mass vaccination campaigns, and supply projection has been developed, and country applications for support is projected and monitored. Next slide, please. I now turn to a representation of the procurement and supply of yellow fever through UNICEF. Since 2017, supply of vaccines through UNICEF has more than doubled compared to 2022. This equates to an annual increase of approximately 15%. And the projection for 22, 23, and 24 shows an equivalent increase. And we project that by 2024, there will be more than 100 million doses available for supply for the three programmatic activities in 2024. If demand from the preventive mass vaccination campaigns continue as it's projected, the supply may still be insufficient to cover the total demand in the short term. But we do project that in the period that will follow from the years covered in this slide, we will see an ease in the supply and demand picture. Next slide, please. This picture shows the supply out of the emergency stockpiles since the last 5 years. We maintain with 2 suppliers an emergency stockpile of 6 million doses, which is revolving with fresh stocks, if not used, and replenished in case vaccines are used for outbreaks, meaning that the 6 million doses is maintained and available at all times. The average supply for outbreak response in these last 5 years and 2022 to date has been a total of 26 million or 5.4 million annually. And for 2022, supply has been 4.6 million to outbreak response. That brings me to my last slide, where I promised you some key takeaways. We project that the total availability from suppliers will continue to increase up to 10% annually. The increased availability is facilitated by the long-term planning of, in particular, preventive mass vaccination campaigns in countries and through our strong partnership. And this includes that countries ensure applications for support to Gavi is submitted up to 18 months prior to the planned start date of their campaign activities. It also assumes that countries through our offices of WHO and UNICEF is also reporting their requirement and forecasts that through the UNICEF annual forecast exercise. Lastly, kind reminder to us of the suppliers in the room that we maintain that accurate reporting of production and availability plans remains critical to meet the objectives of the I strategy and to deliver on the goals by 2026. That was all from me. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Hans. You all work on yellow fever. I often have a broader view of emergencies, and just to mention that it's refreshing to hear that there is enough supply of vaccines and that's increasing. Just recently, the WHO put out a report that said, the vaccine markets are really in need of help. Some 10 suppliers provide 70% of vaccine doses around the world, and especially vaccines for emergencies are really, constrained. And we saw that recently with cholera. So it's really good to hear that things are not always bad. So we're running over time, but we have a few minutes for questions. If you have any, please raise your hand for our speakers who just presented. Don't be shy. We had a question in the chat on EQA. May I invite Maurice to just come in and answer that? He did already in the chat, but it would be nice to hear from you. The question is about quality assurance for 2022. Maurice, do you want to answer?
Yes, of course, I can come. That if you allow me some 2 minutes of 2 seconds. In fact, can you hear me?
Yeah, not too clear. Could you try to speak closer to the mic, maybe?
Yes, I'll try to do so. Let me start my.
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. Yes, in fact, I was saying I posted an answer to Aderuju from Center Public Health Laboratory in Nigeria in a chat. We started the Global Health Laboratory Network launched the first EQA in 2021, and with a successful results for Africa. For instance, we got 20 countries over 22 that participated with excellent results. That's more than 90%, 91% of concordance with the expected results. So for 2022, as she was asking, we are still working with the Global Specialized Lab in USCDC to prepare the next EQA. As you know, we rely always on national laboratories to provide the IgM positive samples to be able to prepare the EQA. So thank you and over.
Thank you, Maurice. I see we have a question from Nikki Shindo at WHO. Nikki.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for a great presentation. I'm representing a strategic and technical advisory group for infectious disease pandemic potential in short-stack IH secretariat. Hans, I have a question for you. So you project the increase from the suppliers will be 6 to 9% annually. Would that reflect the needs increase, or it's just to increase the capacity for outbreak response? So what is the driver of the increase of the suppliers 6 to 9% per year? Thank you.
Hans, would you like to answer that?
Yes, thank you. The availability increase that we're projecting comes through our tender that we conducted a couple of years ago that covers the period of time from 2021 through 2024. And in that, and through our regular updates and consultations with our suppliers, we were both offered and also we projected additional availability.
Shipments. Yes, potentially.
Could people who are not speaking please mute themselves? Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, through that information, we projected the combined number of suppliers that supply to the I strategy and through UNICEF will increase their availability by these numbers that we project in the slide. We also project that we will have the demand from countries and that this demand will increase to absorb the additional availability that suppliers will produce and have offered. And that demand is primarily stemming from the ongoing preventive mass vaccination campaigns and the additional introductions in countries that are also planned during this period of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. I see Kate O'Brien has her hand up. Kate, do you want to come in on this point?
Yeah, just sorry, a series of really great presentations, and clearly one of the things that really stands out here is that certainly on the vaccine side, that the issues on vaccination are not unique to yellow fever. They are systemic or programmatic issues that affect basically any of the antigens that are in the program. So one of the questions I have is, when we sort of think about the monitoring and evaluation that polio is doing, that measles is doing, that yellow fever is doing, all programs really have pretty much the same questions, and there's clearly the kids who are missing out on one antigen are missing out on other antigens. So the question I have is, at the country level, how much is really kind of well joined up at the country level, where the work in the program is about the identification of the zero-dose kids, or in the case of either a second year of life or late first year of life antigen is not about zero-dose kids, but is about the kids who have failed to come back for that particular antigen. It would be really kind of helpful. Maybe we'll get into this in tomorrow's presentations, more the country presentations, about the integration within the program.
Thanks, Kate. Was that question for Hans? Hans, do you want to begin? You're muted if you're speaking. There you go.
Apologies. I do believe maybe it's a question, at least first and foremost, for our more program-oriented colleagues, rather than a supply-demand issue. But please correct me if I misunderstood.
Kate, maybe you can tell us who should answer that question.
I'm muted. There we go. Okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute. It was for Cassandra.
Cassandra, please. Kate, could you repeat the question, please?
My question was that many of the pieces of data that were presented around vaccine coverage from the Vaccine Delivery Working Group and the issues around differentials in coverage in countries between measles and yellow fever, for example, or the mapping, for instance, of where are missing children. Those are the same efforts that are going on for other antigens. And my question is, given that for every antigen, it's very much the same questions that the program is asking at the country level. So at the country program level, not at the partner level, but at the country program level, is it clear that the yellow fever efforts are fully integrated into the immunization program and not a verticalized program within a country program? And so my question is really about, and what I was saying was maybe we will get to this a little bit more tomorrow, where there are some country perspective presentations. But what I'm really trying to understand is the leveraging that's happening around the specific programmatic questions that are being evaluated and sort of interrogated in order to generate improvements on coverage at the country program level. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. And you're completely right. I think a lot of the issues are not necessarily, program specific. We might see some of the issues for low coverage are more systemic. That's why, at least for this particular exercise, we were trying to focus as well on the countries that were having a big delta between measles and yellow fever, because that would at least give us a first inkling that the potential issues are program specific and not necessarily systemic. But this is just the first exploration. Of course, after this, it's about looking at some specific countries and then digging a bit deeper. And indeed, once we do that, the potential solution, would definitely need to be integrated because it would be accompanying some systemic issue potentially as well, where we might see low coverage throughout different routine antigens. And so the solution would need to be integrated as well when we get to country level.
Thank you, Cassandra. Wondering if there are any participants from our countries who would like to come in on this, on the synergies between different diseases, different vaccination programs. But like Kate said, we'll be discussing this more in depth tomorrow. So maybe with that, we'll move on. There was a question to Cassandra, which is answered in the chat. Thank you for that. We now move on to a presentation from the African region. It's the presenter is Ado Bwaka, and he'll be talking to us about the experience from the African region. He works at WHO Afro. So welcome, Ado. Please start your presentation, and after that, we'll have a Q&A session with him.
So Ado has presented, introduced. I'm working with WHO at Afro and standing as the regional program manager for vaccine preventable disease program. So the presentation is made on behalf of the two programs, the VPD and the EPR programs. Next slide, please. Can we have the next? Okay, thank you. So this is just a reminder about the strategic objectives, the priority intervention and actions that we have in our regional framework for our implementation. And then at the bottom of the slide, we are planning to have a progress report to be presented to the member states at the regional committee that will take place in 2023. If we don't have chance to do that because the deadline for submitting the agenda topics is really tight, so we will plan to do it in 2024. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we had a resurgence of the yellow fever outbreaks basically towards the end of last year, 2021. And we had a number of countries where we got these outbreaks due basically to immunity gaps against the yellow fever virus. And for some of these countries that are mentioned there, Ghana, there were some specificities with the outbreaks. We had in Ghana an explosive number of cases among unimmunized nomadic groups that were not covered during routine immunization services or during the preventive mass vaccination campaign that Ghana conducted in 2020. In Cameroon, the cases emanated mostly from the northern part of the country where the services are affected by the insecurity and the transhumance of from neighboring countries like Central African Republic. In Chad, we also had outbreaks among nomadic groups, and in Central African Republic, basically in areas that are affected by these insecurity challenges. And then in Kenya, that was like an isolated outbreak that took place in a rural setting in one of the counties, and this was actually among a large number of unimmunized naive population. Next slide, please. So some of the outbreak risk factors that were highlighted, the environmental factors where we have the vector in the niches that are identified in countries, the population mobility that are mentioned with inadequate access to health services, and then the issue of funding and the political will to prevent outbreaks is also one of the risk factors that have been mentioned, and this all within a context of low collective immunity that was actually exaggerated during the COVID-19 pandemic with the decline in the provision of routine immunization services, and of course, the postponement or the delay in conducting the preventive mass vaccination campaigns that were planned before. Next slide, please. So in November 2021, when the outbreaks emerged, the regional director for AFRO established an incident management support team that was set up in Ouagadougou, where we have the inter-country support team for WHO. And some of the actions that took place with this IMST are listed on the left side of this slide that you have time to look at. So we supported countries to do case classification. We trained Ministry of Health and partners, officers. We also briefed them on the yellow fever screening and control at the borders. And then we also had weekly coordination meetings with all countries, one for English-speaking countries and one for Francophone countries. There was a weekly dashboard and CTREP that was shared with all partners. And then an intra-action review was conducted and a risk analysis with countries that were affected. So in total, we had 11 reactive requests that were submitted to the ICG. 9 of them were approved from 6 countries. And we had about 4 million people vaccinated during this reactive vaccination in 5 countries. And the 6th country is actually Niger Republic that is planning to do the reactive vaccination coming next month. We also had among these campaigns post-campaign coverage surveys that were completed in one of the 5 countries, and 2 are still ongoing. So some of the lessons learned, the coordination is very crucial for us to be able to manage competing engagements, especially at the country level. Access to funding with dedicated human resource people is very vital to carry out response operations. The signals and the cases of yellow fever may likely have to continue, but we need to maintain a very strong surveillance system and strengthen the referral of samples to the regional reference labs that we have for early interpretation and response. Of course, the continuous support to countries will assist in quickly respond to areas where evidence of the disease or amplification of the disease is demonstrated. So going strategic objective by strategic objective, for strategic objective number 1, we had 14 countries that have implemented their high implementation plans. We have 4 of them that were reviewed and 2 are already being validated. In terms of routine, 25 out of the 27 countries that are at risk have already introduced the yellow fever vaccine into their routine schedule. So Kenya introduced partially and Uganda is yet to introduce. Ethiopia and South Sudan is also yet to introduce. From the WENIC 2021, 22%, that's like 5 countries out of the 23, had a coverage for yellow fever above 80%. The preventive mass vaccination campaigns were completed nationwide in Angola, Ghana, and Republic of Congo. DRC and Nigeria are still going on to do that. And then Uganda will do it in December. Chad had his application submitted in September this year, and then Niger and Guinea-Bissau are yet to submit the application for preventive mass vaccination campaigns, and they're planning to do it in January 2023. Some of the challenges, I think COVID-19 really impacted in terms of cost of activities. The hesitancy to yellow fever vaccine was also increased by the misinformation due to COVID-19 vaccines. The delay in decision-making for the introduction of yellow fever vaccine into routine in Ethiopia and South Sudan, and this is basically in terms of co-financing, and then the postponement of the campaigns, as we said. So as next steps for this strategic objective, we are planning to have an update operational plan based on the midterm evaluation recommendation that have just been concluded, and then continue to review and update the national plan for the 27 high-risk countries, and make sure that we work in collaboration and synergy with other partners, with the high working groups, and do the very high level advocacy with Ethiopia for Gavi application. Next slide, please. On strategic objective number 2, next slide, please. Can I have the next slide, please? So on strategic objective number 2, next slide.
We are seeing the next slide.
This is the strategic objective 2. Do you still want us to move?
Okay, so on that strategy number 2, we have out of the 27 high-risk countries and seven moderate risk countries that are requiring yellow fever vaccination certificate for travelers. The yellow fever IMST received reports from 9 countries that are screening travelers at the point of entry. And we had a guideline for preparedness, readiness, and response planning for yellow fever outbreak in urban settings that is still being finalized. In terms of challenges, we have insufficient knowledge of health workers in charge of post-health control, insufficient staff actually dedicated at the point of entry, and then inadequate cross-border collaboration on yellow fever vaccination card verification at the point of entry. And of course, inadequate cold chain and sufficient stock of yellow fever vaccines at this point. So some of the next steps are to conduct a survey to determine the extent of screening and yellow fever vaccination at the point of entry in all high and moderate risk countries, and the training of personnel at those point of entry. Leverage resources in other health programs to ensure that on-site vaccination of unvaccinated people is conducted at the major points of entry. Next slide, please. So for strategic objective number 3, we had 4 regional workshops to strengthen lab diagnostic capacity and data management. 11 serology accreditation visits were conducted, and for a total of 18 national labs that were accredited now. 1 national laboratory accredited for molecular testing, that's 1 lab in Nigeria, and then 11 on-site technical support were provided to countries on the lab surveillance. 12 countries benefited from training on yellow fever outbreak investigation and response that the IMST conducted, and then 4 countries have completed or about to complete their training on surge team members. In terms of challenges, we still have technical challenge with the regional reference labs. We had it in Uvri in Uganda and CPC, Center Pasteur Dakar in Yaoundé. And then some delay in issuing export permits or clearance for the referral of sample to the regional referral labs, and delay in sending green light for the delivery of reagent equipment and supplies to support laboratories. As next steps, ensuring capacity of lab for rapid case detection, ensuring capability of yellow fever outbreak response is strengthened through the implementation of the surge flagship project. I will talk about it later. And then more molecular accreditation for national and regional reference lab. We are also planning to have an production of commercial kits for serology in the labs. So as a way forward,
Dr. Addo, may I ask you to just wrap up in a minute? Thank you.
Yes. So we are working towards resource mobilization to address the critical human resources shortages. So in fact, the yellow fever IMST is supposed to close by early December, the 5th of December. We're also planning to have high-level advocacy, align and effective partner support. And next slide, please. So the African region is organizing what we call the three flagship projects. One of them is the surge, which is strengthening and utilizing response groups for emergencies. And then the second one is the TAS flagship project, transforming African surveillance system. And then the third one is PRO's flagship project, which is promoting resilience of systems for emergencies. So we can give more details on this, and we have some extra slides that you can look at after this meeting. So I want to thank you for listening, and we'll be happy to take some comment and question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Addo. We know how important the African continent is for the global response against yellow fever. So thank you for that presentation. Are there any questions for Dr. Addo? Please do raise your hands. There are some words of appreciation for the work in Burkina Faso multi-country yellow fever outbreak. That's from Christopher Tamal from Ghana. Thank you. Are there any questions? Let me see. Some more appreciation on the molecular lab coming to Nigeria. Lots of progress, I see. Are there any questions in the room? Let me just check the chat. Well, this allows us to catch up on time. So something unfortunate, but something good that comes out of that. Thank you, Dr. Addo. I'm sure we will have a lot to discuss in the coming days, so we'll get back to you. With that, we come to a little break. Given that we're short on time, it'll be a 10-minute break. And when you come back, there'll be a 5-minute video for you to watch. So it's where I am in Geneva, it's 4:42. If we can please come back by 4:52, so in 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. We're going to restart. I said that we would go to a video after the break, but since we still have Dr. Addo with us, and we're fortunate to have his expertise, we'd like to pose him a question that we received, which is on actually taking off from what Kate O'Brien was mentioning earlier. So the question is that we've seen how important routine immunization is. Is there a vision to increase yellow fever coverage through the current emphasis on reaching zero-dose children? How can we support the region to increase yellow fever vaccination as part of routine immunization? Dr. Addo.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I actually wanted to make a comment when the question was asked by Kate. At the country level, teams that are working on yellow fever are the same teams that are also working on measles or polio or rubella or meningitis. So we don't have, at least for the regional, Afro-regional context, we don't have a difference between yellow fever and measles in terms of teams or programs that work on these diseases. So we have had some instances whereby in terms of integration or combination of campaigns, we have campaigns that yellow fever campaigns or measles campaigns are integrated or combined with yellow fever campaigns. So the region is actually working towards after the WENIC 2021 result release, we're working towards having a kind of a strategy for tackling the zero-dose children. And some countries have designed some plans, some strategies, some approaches to go about reaching out these zero-dose children. The other area of support that we are also looking at is to make sure that we work with other partners that are working in the region, like Africa CDC, and tap into some of the resources that are coming from these partners to support countries to increase the support for routine immunization services. We know that countries are coming out of the consequences of COVID-19 pandemic, and strategies have been put in place to make sure that there are some kind of recovery plans to organize intensified routine immunization activities so as to catch up these children that are under immunized or zero dose. So we are working on this strategy, like integration with other response or other vaccine preventable disease outbreak response, to make sure that yellow fever vaccine is also provided like during these campaigns. Increase the vaccination sessions where it is possible, to make sure that the reach of these sessions is expanded, so that children can be reached with all vaccines. The other strategy is making sure that there are other interventions that are provided in addition to the immunization services, and these have been implemented in many countries, making sure that when these interventions are offered, they are also offered along with routine immunization services. In terms of making sure that these children are identified, especially in remote areas, so opportunities of campaigns or any other opportunities are also used to make sure that these children are identified, and areas where the pocket of these under immunized or zero-dose children are well planned and identified. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Addo. We also have a question on one of the flagship initiatives, that's the PROS. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's the Promoting Resilience of Systems for Emergencies initiative. So the question is it possible to say a little bit more about this initiative, and how would it help strengthen emergency preparedness for yellow fever?
Yeah, thank you. I think I have my colleagues from the EPR cluster that can also throw more light on this initiative. So the region is has come up with this flagship project, and trying to reorganize or restructure the emergency preparedness and response cluster into these 3 projects. And there's been some action that have been taken. One of them is a call for interest of not only WHO staff, but also other partner staff to be recruited as a group of experts that will be ready for any response, outbreak response activity. And training have been going on in countries to make sure that these teams are trained and prepared for this kind of activity. So the PROS flagship project is actually promoting resilience of systems for emergencies. And this is actually based in some pillars that are listed in the slide that I showed, have some evidence-based plans, policies, and the legislation to institutionalize the implementation of recommendations by regional and global body, ensure prioritization of final resources, and bolster the multi-sectoral mechanism for coordinated decision-making. We are also looking at having some system and tools that we can implement using the International Health Regulation platform. Make sure that the workforce is developed to ensure support is provided to countries. It also includes the risk communication and community engagement and sustainable predictable financing to ensure availability of adequate funds for preparedness efforts. So it means there's a lot of effort to make with government, Ministry of Health, and other ministers to engage them into providing resources. And this advocacy also goes to partners that are supporting the I initiative, so that these resources are used to build a very resilient urban centers and make sure that there are readiness plans for countries to react to any outbreak. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Addo. I see a number of other questions. Since we're running out of time, we'll just take a couple. So I'll start with the hand that's raised. William, would you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes,
Loud
I can
and clear.
Okay, so my name is William. I work in the regional office for Africa with the emergency program as a yellow fever focal point. So I just want to supplement what Dr. Addo said regarding the PROS project, which is one of the flagships that projects that was launched this year. It's one of the three projects, and the preparedness and response cluster will execute its activities. So specifically for yellow fever, I think the PROS will be very, very helpful in guiding the way we address activities under strategic objective 2. So we are talking about strengthening capacities for preparedness and readiness to outbreaks, and also strengthening the implementation of capacities, IHR capacities with respect to yellow fever vaccination. So I just wanted to underscore those two activities that are very critical for I implementation. We also have the strengthening, transforming African surveillance systems, which will actually also help in the detection and reporting and confirmation of yellow fever, and also the surge, which very much.
Thank you, William. I don't know if there was a question there, but I suppose you're adding to what Dr. Addo was saying. Dr. Addo, would you like to say anything in response?
No, I think the response has been given. So these initiatives are at the early stage. So we are looking forward to have them implemented, and we will surely evaluate the impact, and we hope that it will really assist the region to move forward.
Thank you. We'll take the questions in the chat. Dr. Addo, if you could answer them together. There's a question on country-specific strategies related to vaccination coverage. to increase the low coverage. And then there's a question about vaccine certificates. Do you have the questions, or would you like me to read them out?
No, I have them. Are they for to improve vaccine certificates so they are not so easily counterfeited? Yeah, I think we have effort to do in this area, advocating with member states to enforce the verification and vaccination of travelers for yellow fever, especially at the point of entry. And this is in relation with the international health regulations for which most of, or not maybe only, not for which all countries in the region have agreed to implement. Then the question about, are there any country-specific strategies to increase the low coverage? So the increasing of vaccination side, improving the demand side, improving the service delivery side. These are strategies that most of the countries are using. I can cite an example of Nigeria, which is using these multiple interventions provided to immunization services. So we also have the PIRIs, what we call periodic intensified routine immunization activities that are being organized by countries to catch up on children that are under immunized and zero dose. We have with COVID-19 vaccination that most countries are now using to integrate into the routine immunization services. So there are a number of strategies and approaches that countries are using to tackle this issue of low routine immunization coverage. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Addo. In the interest of time, we'll move on. There's still a couple of questions, but I'll request colleagues to just respond in chat if possible. Moving on, we have a little video, still staying in Africa. This is on the work iPartners have been doing in Nigeria, and we're going to hear the story of Muhammad and his family.
I lost my second child to yellow fever disease. It was a very traumatizing experience for my family and I. We rushed the child to the hospital when he started showing symptoms of the disease, and he died 2 to 3 days after because his internal organs had been very damaged. As a result, I lost my child to yellow fever. Yellow fever has really affected our community because of the numerous sad stories I am hearing about it. This is why I rushed my remaining children here when I heard about the vaccination exercise.
Initially, we've been hearing that there is vaccine for yellow fever. We were thinking, when will this vaccine reach us in this very community? And thank God today is a reality.
So, the
yellow fever vaccine is very important. It is good for me, my children, and the community at large. The vaccine assures us of a healthier life.
We prefer to prevent ourselves from the disease than to cure it, because if the disease is already affected someone, it will have problem in us. But if we prevented it with the vaccination, we will be more safer in the community.
the effect of not taking this vaccine will affect the community in terms of the spread of the disease. Whenever there is an outbreak, it will spread to many communities. So one of the effects. And also those that have been affected are liable to die. So if you didn't take the vaccine, it will affect the community, it will affect the health status of individuals.
Our children are suffering from this disease, but we want to thank God that we are being recognized to bring the vaccine so that we help our community. So we really appreciate that. The reaction of the community, they were very happy to see that we are coming out for the people to administer antigen for them. Even the adult, because before we are going out house to house, we only give polio. They will ask, what about the adult? But now the adults are very happy. They are even turned up, very happy to come to receive the vaccine that we are giving. They are very encouraging. The community are very happy.
It's a huge campaign that generated a lot of collaboration and coordination. Without that proper coordination and collaboration with different stakeholders, the campaign may not have been a success.
I'm waiting for yellow fever to come because I have already taken my vaccine. If you come, I know at least I am protected. Go. Yeah.
That was a nice little break for us watching that film. With that, we're going to move regions. We'll next go to the Latin America and the Caribbean regional update. I'd like to share that in the room here, we're joined by Marie Bomba, who's from the monitoring and evaluation team. So if there are any questions around that, we have an expert for you, so don't hesitate to drop that in the chat. And with that, we'll go to, this is actually a recorded update from Yamila Romer, and there's one more person, Jairo Mendez. Over to the update.
Saludos a todos. Voy a presentar una actualización de los datos de inmunización y un resumen de los proyectos regionales de las Américas. Aquí vemos simultáneamente la cobertura de vacunación contra fiebre amarilla y la primera dosis de la vacuna contra sarampión, rubiola y paperas, desde la introducción de la vacuna contra fiebre amarilla en el esquema de vacunación de rutina de cada país endémico. Hay países como Guyana y Trinidad y Tobago que mantienen una cobertura alta y estable. En los demás países, sin embargo, hay fluctuaciones en sus capacidades para lograr una cobertura óptima. Algunas consideraciones programáticas a considerar son una reducción en la tasa de cobertura en Colombia en 2015 y en Perú en 2009, después de cambiar de una administración conjunta de ambas vacunas a una administración secuencial, pasando la edad de indicación de 12 meses a los 18 meses en Colombia y 15 meses en Perú. Esta fuerte caída en las tasas de cobertura se recuperó lentamente en Colombia, pero mostró solo una ligera recuperación en Perú. La gran brecha en Brasil se debe a la recomendación nacional de la vacuna en 2017, que aumentó bruscamente el denominador de la tasa, pero que también ha mejorado progresivamente. Esta diapositiva representa la población inmune acumulada para fiebre amarilla en los últimos 20 años incluyendo solo aquellos vacunados a través de la inmunización de rutina en la infancia, que asciende a más de 80 millones de personas, y muestra que los esfuerzos para mantener una alta cobertura en la infancia es la mejor estrategia a largo plazo para lograr inmunidad de rebaño. No obstante, sigue existiendo un número significativo de susceptibles. Aquí vemos con más detalle las tendencias en la cobertura en los últimos años. En 2021, solo 3 países alcanzaron una cobertura superior al 80%, frente a 7 países que lo habían hecho en 2019, antes de la pandemia de COVID, que provocó la interrupción global de los programas de inmunización. A nivel regional, esto significó una caída de 10 puntos en la cobertura promedio. Para 2021, solamente la mitad de los países lograron una brecha de menos de 5 puntos con la vacuna de sarampión. Aquí está el análisis de la demanda versus la oferta de vacunas en la región. Vemos que el fondo rotatorio ha mantenido un suministro regular de vacuna en 2022, que nos ha permitido atender la demanda de todos los países y territorios. También quiero mencionar los proyectos que estamos haciendo. Los perfiles de países para fiebre amarilla se completaron con el endorso de cada país y estarán siendo publicados en Pajo Iris en los próximos días, fácilmente disponibles para todo el público. Aquí vemos un modelo. Estamos realizando un estudio para evaluar la presencia de anticuerpos neutralizantes contra fiebre amarilla 4 a 7 años después de la vacunación, en una cohorte de niños que fueron vacunados al año de edad, como parte de un estudio que evaluó la seguridad y eficacia de la administración combinada de vacunas de fiebre amarilla y sarampión. Esta cohorte se encuentra en la provincia de Misiones, en el área endémica de fiebre amarilla en Argentina. Está ubicada en la frontera entre Paraguay y Brasil. El estudio se realizará en 3 ciudades, Oberá, El Dorado y Posadas, y se espera inscribir a más de 500 niños. Las actividades de campo ya comenzaron la semana pasada y esperamos poder generar evidencia para informar sobre las mejores recomendaciones en vacunación. También estamos realizando una encuesta dirigida a trabajadores de salud, proveedores de vacunas, con el objetivo de identificar las barreras de acceso a la vacunación contra fiebre amarilla. La encuesta se llevará a cabo en Perú, Surinam y Ecuador. Será en línea, pero también se harán encuestas en papel para áreas sin acceso a Internet. Acabamos de terminar el estudio piloto y planeamos lanzar la encuesta para el periodo diciembre-febrero. Esta información esperamos ayude a diseñar estrategias para mejorar las coberturas. Dentro de las actividades de inmunización a nivel regional, OPS apoya la implementación de campañas de puesta al día multiantígenos para fortalecer los programas de inmunización y cerrar brechas. La Semana de la Vacunación en las Américas se llevó a cabo en abril. Es una iniciativa regional que tiene como objetivo promover la equidad y el acceso a la vacunación. La campaña de este año propuso apoyar a los países para cerrar las brechas bajo el lema "Estás protegido, ponte todas tus vacunas". La campaña incluyó el antígeno de fiebre amarilla en 12 países y se aplicaron más de 80.000 dosis de vacuna. Y recientemente en octubre se realizaron los 8 días de acción por las vacunas. Esta campaña busca revitalizar la importancia de la inmunización y se difundió información sobre la vacuna contra fiebre amarilla. En Venezuela, en respuesta al brote reportado en el estado de Monagas en septiembre del 2021, OPS mantuvo apoyo técnico permanente con el país para varias actividades que resultaron exitosas en controlar el brote. Este tema se va a tratar con más detalle mañana, pero aquí solo quiero mostrar que desde el año 2019, ante la detección de actividad epizootica en Venezuela, se estructuró un plan de vacunación en 3 fases dirigido a llegar a la población susceptible de todo el país. La primera fase de la campaña se desarrolló entre 2020 y 2021 y se completó con éxito. Se centró en los 10 estados de alto riesgo, que son los estados fronterizos desde Guyana hasta Colombia y la región oriental del país. Se está ejecutando la segunda fase, dirigida a 9 estados de moderado riesgo, que concluirá el próximo año. Y la tercera fase, prevista para 2024 y 2025, tiene como objeto vacunar a las personas de los estados costeros, incluyendo Caracas, la capital, que se consideran estados de bajo riesgo. Como consideraciones finales, todos los países de las Américas donde la fiebre amarilla es endémica cuentan con planes de vacunación multianuales que incluyen fiebre amarilla, y todos, con la única excepción de Venezuela, financian completamente sus programas de vacunación. A pesar de que se ha acumulado una gran población inmune a lo largo de los años, persisten brechas que aumentaron aún más después de COVID-19. Es importante aprovechar las oportunidades de las campañas de vacunación de rutina y puesta al día para la administración conjunta de la vacuna contra fiebre amarilla, como por ejemplo durante las campañas de puesta al día de sarampión. Y por último, pero no menos importante, quiero mencionar que estamos trabajando de manera integral con la Unidad de Emergencias en Salud de OPS para lanzar pronto la hoja de ruta para la implementación de la estrategia AI en América, con objetivos y metas adaptadas a las necesidades de la región para guiar a los países en el desarrollo de sus propios planes. Y en este sentido, estamos trabajando en integrar indicadores de fiebre amarilla en el plan de trabajo de la estrategia para revitalizar la inmunización como un bien público para la salud universal, que es la Agenda de Inmunización 2030 adaptada a las Américas. Con esto en mente, estamos incluyendo la hoja de ruta en la agenda de la próxima reunión ordinaria del TAG. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you for that. The presenters will be available tomorrow after the presentation on Brazil. So if you have any questions, do please either send them in now and we can save them, or you can also ask them tomorrow directly. So with that, we're going to go to everything is important, but one of the important sessions, which is on the evaluation of the midterm evaluation. I'm sorry, I saw somebody briefly on screen.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por la oportunidad de presentar el día de hoy respecto a la situación de fiebre amarilla en las Américas, una actualización en vigilancia y por supuesto la situación actual. En la región de las Américas, por supuesto, estamos en un riesgo permanente de brotes de fiebre amarilla que puede ser de diferentes magnitudes. Si bien COVID-19 y en este momento otras emergencias, tanto regionales como globales, aún representan un reto importante para la vigilancia y para los sistemas de salud, sin duda alguna la vacunación y las campañas han sido fuertemente golpeadas por la respuesta a COVID-19. Para el año 2022, en términos de fiebre amarilla, 3 países de la región han confirmado casos: Brasil, Perú y Bolivia. Muy rápidamente, en cuanto en el periodo de monitoramiento de la fiebre amarilla para Brasil, que va de julio 2021 hasta junio de 2022, se reportaron 5 casos confirmados de fiebre amarilla en humanos, incluyendo 4 muertes. Estos ocurrieron en los estados de Pará y de Tocantins, todos en adultos jóvenes entre 20 y 29 años, de los cuales 4 no tenían historia de vacunación, 1 tenía historia de vacunación, y todos en áreas selváticas debido a su trabajo. Los casos, como ustedes lo pueden ver en la gráfica, ocurrieron principalmente en diciembre del 2021 y en marzo del 2022. En cuanto a las epizootias y la vigilancia de primates humanos, se reportaron en este periodo 1.267 sospechas de epizootia, con 26 de hecho demostradas y confirmadas por laboratorio, principalmente en los estados de Pará, Minas Gerais, Santa Catarina y Río Grande do Sul. y ustedes pueden ver entonces que se han demostrado principalmente en enero del 2021 y en febrero y marzo del 2021. Solamente para mencionar una tendencia que ya hemos visto desde 2016, cómo la fiebre amarilla se ha venido moviendo y se ha estado distribuyendo en un movimiento permanente hacia el sur del país, y en este momento ya alcanzando en las fronteras, principalmente con Paraguay, Argentina, Uruguay, lo cual hace que estos países estén trabajando también intensamente precisamente en intensificar la vigilancia para la detección temprana de casos en sus fronteras, pero hasta el momento no se han detectado ni demostrado casos en ninguno de estos tres países, ni en las áreas de frontera. Para este nuevo periodo de vigilancia entre julio 2022 hasta junio 2023, 480 casos sospechosos de primates no humanos han sido reportados en Paraná y 123 casos sospechosos en humanos, sin embargo, ninguno ha sido confirmado en este momento. En cuanto a la fiebre amarilla en Perú, vemos acá entonces el acumulado de casos durante los últimos años. En el año 2022, 11 casos probables fueron reportados, de los cuales 6 fueron confirmados por laboratorio, principalmente en adultos jóvenes entre 19 y 46 años. Los casos que se han reportado en Ayacucho, en Cusco, en Junín, en San Martín y en Ucayali. De estos, 5 han muerto, principalmente en el departamento de Junín, incluyendo uno con una historia de vacunación en donde se piensa que hay falla en la vacunación y se está investigando, y uno en Ucayali con una coinfección demostrada por leptospirosis. En cuanto a la situación en Bolivia, se han reportado casos en 2022 hasta la semana epidemiológica 18, 14 sospechosos, 5 confirmados por laboratorio, de los cuales todos han sido en el departamento de La Paz, principalmente en los municipios de Caranavi, en Guanay y en Teoponte. Estos casos han sido también en pacientes entre 18 y 60 años, todos con una historia de exposición en áreas selváticas debido a su trabajo. En cuanto al componente de laboratorio, ha sido un trabajo que se ha hecho, que se ha mantenido durante los últimos años, a pesar del COVID, en donde hemos estado trabajando principalmente en las capacidades de detección molecular, en inmunohistoquímica y también en las plataformas de serología. Durante el año 2022 se hicieron varias actividades de la mano con nuestros centros colaboradores y con el equipo del grupo de trabajo en laboratorio de fiebre amarilla de la OMS. Y aquí simplemente para mencionar algunas de las actividades que tenemos planeadas para los próximos años. Sin duda alguna, la fiebre amarilla sigue siendo de gran impacto en nuestra región. Sin embargo, durante el año 2022 la actividad fue relativamente baja, con solo 3 países confirmando casos. Los sistemas de salud ya se están empezando a recuperar del COVID. Sin embargo, es importante mencionar que las campañas de vacunación tienen que ser fortalecidas. Nosotros como OPS mantenemos una relación constante y una comunicación constante con los países, principalmente endémicos, para fortalecer la vigilancia, las acciones de vigilancia. Y desde el laboratorio estamos entregando y distribuyendo permanentemente el material, tanto de laboratorio como en guías, para estar seguros que se mantiene la vigilancia por laboratorio en una articulación muy, muy cercana con el CDC, Forcones, con nuestros centros colaboradores y por supuesto con el grupo de trabajo de fiebre amarilla de laboratorio de la OMS en Ginebra. Con esto entonces termino esta actualización de epidemiología de fiebre amarilla. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, and sorry for the confusion earlier. I didn't realize there were 2 videos. As somebody left a comment in the chat, the presentation was in English, so I hope that made it more accessible to more people. With that, we do move on to the session on the midterm evaluation, and I'll invite Michelle Gross and I hope I'm saying it right, Mike and Mansfield Jacobson to present their findings.
Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. I hope you can all hear me. My colleague Mike and I look forward to presenting our top-level findings and recommendations. My name is Michelle Gross, and I'm the head of EuroHealth Group, who was asked to conduct this midterm evaluation. Our slides are quite dense, as we wanted to provide you with as much information as possible. to further your understanding of the findings that are backing up our recommendations. We'll be summarizing the slides for you and hopefully they'll be made available to you. So feel free to read the slides while we're presenting. Next slide. The main objective of the evaluation was to document key achievements, best practices, challenges, and gaps, along with contextual factors and changes that are affecting yellow fever transmission and therefore the overall implementation of the eye strategy. Ultimately, the objective was to develop recommendations for the immediate way forward, but also beyond 2026. Next slide. The evaluation is both summative and formative, assessing the progress from the strategy inception to date, looking at both program delivery across all levels, as well as management and partnership arrangements and performance. Again, to develop actionable recommendations. Next slide. We looked at 5 questions covering relevance and coherence of the strategy, along with implementation efficiency and effectiveness, including
Michelle, could I ask you
we
to
also
just slow
delved
down
into
a bit?
issues around sustainability, including sustainable financing, and finally, the extent to which the strategy included and addressed gender equity and human rights concerns. Next slide. We use standard data collection methods, including a document review, key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and online surveys.
Michelle, could I just ask you to slow down a little bit? I'm just conscious that there are interpreters who are trying to understand and read at the same time. Thank you.
Sure, we're trying to get through it in 30 minutes too. That's why I'm speaking really fast, but I'll try to slow down. We also had country case studies in Brazil and Ghana, which focused on identifying best practices. Next slide. So I'm going to move on to the overarching findings and the recommendations now. Next slide. So high-level finding 1 looks at the key challenge of scarce human resources at all levels, which really threatens a successful implementation of the strategy. So overall, we found that there's a small and not fully equipped eye team which exists, and that includes the Secretariat, regional support, and the working group members. Most of those working group members who are typically in full-time positions. It's also important to point out that despite being small, the work of the Secretariat is lauded by all, as is the work of the program management group and the working groups. However, there is a notable gap in gender equity and human rights input. We noted that costing for human resources was found to be insufficient, and it's mainly relying on in-kind support. The exception to that is at the Secretariat level, which is funded by WHO, but has been somewhat stymied by the WHO recruitment process, which has resulted in vacant positions within the Secretariat. We also found that yellow fever is not necessarily prioritized, or staff do not have enough time to dedicate to yellow fever. And that's particularly true in the 3 no-regret countries, which are Nigeria, Ethiopia, and DRC. And finally, we found that the annual plans, which are developed under the strategy, are too ambitious given the human resources constraint. Next slide, please. So these findings fed into development of the first recommendation, which really focuses on addressing these critical human resources shortages at all levels by determining what are the requirements based on the experience to date. So we developed a list of sub-recommendations in order to fulfill this recommendation. And these include accelerating the approval and recruitment process of the planned eye positions within the region and at headquarters level, developing joint resource mobilization plans together with the eye partners so that they can guarantee funding for human resources, ensuring gender equity and human rights expertise is available within the Secretariat. And that doesn't necessarily mean a staff member, but someone with knowledge or someone who can be tapped into. Expanding regional support teams with the help of the partner organizations, streamlining yellow fever work with other funding sources or program responses at the country level, but at the same time, including clear performance indicators for yellow fever for the relevant staff. And in those 3 no-regret countries, which I mentioned before, it's recommended that a part-time or full-time position exists for yellow fever. And finally, prioritizing key interventions for the next 2 years based on scenarios of limited human resource capacity or increased human resource capacity as suggested in this recommendation. Next slide. So moving on to high-level finding 2, which focuses on what we found to be low prioritization of yellow fever in relation to other competing priorities. So the key findings related to this include the limited political will on the part of some countries, which is reflected in their domestic resource allocations or lack thereof for yellow fever. an expressed need to bolster the importance of yellow fever due to the difficulties in sustaining momentum for the disease, in part due to COVID-19, which we've seen for many diseases. But it seems that at present there's more focus on yellow fever when there are outbreaks rather than from a prevention perspective. There's a lack of business cases at the country level, and if a country plan for yellow fever does exist, which in most cases it does not, they have not been implemented. There are concerted efforts to develop various communication materials related to the eye strategy, and we saw one of them just now in the video that you all watched, yet there's scope for more. We're yet to see yellow fever introduced in Ethiopia and South Sudan, despite significant planning efforts. In addition, there appears to be a prioritization of PMVCs, however, with delays in implementation due to reasons of financial constraints, lack of vaccines, and challenges around political will. And finally, some examples of accountability from a municipality level exist, and those could be capitalized on. Next slide, please. These findings lead us to recommendation 2, which focuses on relaunching the yellow fever strategy to influence overall political will and overall attention to global health security. And we suggest to do this through 3 main measures. Number 1, developing strong business cases. The second one is organizing and engaging in high-level events. And the third one is broadening the audience or the scope for advocacy and communication materials. So to fulfill this recommendation, we think that it is critical that strong business cases are developed, but in a very timely fashion, that the relaunch of the yellow fever strategy builds on the lessons learned since implementation. And this should include highlighting achievements of the regions and the countries, but also critically discussing concretely integration with other vaccine preventable diseases and related programs. And that includes IA 2030, Gavi 5.0, the GLI, et cetera. I think it's also critical that dissemination of communication materials are targeted more broadly, and that is including in the Americas. So, extending the various languages in which the communication materials are made, and also the different media channels. We also think that high-level advocacy efforts should be engaged in at the country level with the support of the regional level to foster that country buy-in and political commitment. And these efforts, it's critical that these efforts include CSO engagement. Next slide. Further efforts should include conducting high-level multi-partner advocacy efforts aimed at accelerating engagement in Ethiopia and South Sudan to integrate yellow fever within their routine immunization systems. Also encouraging countries to integrate eye strategy activities in their multi-year health sector plans, national immunization plans, and if they exist, their emergency preparedness or urban resilience plans. And then finally, tapping into the Burkina Faso experience, working with municipalities to learn how best to engage them for improved accountability. Next slide. For high-level finding 3, we found that at the global level, the governance structures are very strong, yet there is room for further inclusion of country representation and diversification. So overall, we found that the governance structure is reported to include minimal engagement of the countries, which is seen as a limiting factor, really, for their ownership, understanding, and their commitment to the eye strategy at the country level. We also noted that there is additional scope for the leadership group to actually serve as a decision-making body, because what we saw was that it's not perceived as that at the moment. Some of the expertise in the key areas of the eye strategy, for example, for IHR, urban health, gender equity, and human rights, are lacking in the governance structures, and this was pointed out at the eye secretariat level earlier. And then for the partnership as a whole, beyond the management, there seems to be a lack of engagement of CSOs who are really involved in the vaccine and routine immunization activities, often within the hard-to-reach communities. And there also seems to be no notable engagement of extractive industries, such as oil and mining, and a limited engagement with other relevant sectors. And finally, conflict and fragility are factors affecting many of the 40 high-risk countries, yet the eye activities to address these increased risks of yellow fever in these countries are minimal. So as per above, we think that working with the CSOs in these countries is considered essential. Next slide. So recommendation 3 focuses on the eye governance and eye partnership structures and the need to diversify and expand those to foster better effectiveness and efficiency and to improve ownership at the country level. And we think this can be done through including country representation as permanent members of the leadership group, the program management group, and the working groups. and then using that leadership group really as a decision-making body. So involved in validating decisions that come from the program management group, but also providing strategic direction. Also ensuring that IHR and urban health, vector surveillance, et cetera, expertise is included in the relevant working groups. But at the same time, exploring if these working groups could actually be incorporated under the IA 2030 working groups. We also think it's important to include private sector partners and organizations in the I partnership and tap into their corporate social responsibility agendas. And then also including CSOs at all levels, particularly those with experience from fragile and complex settings. Next slide. High-level finding 4 focuses on gender, equity, and human rights aspects, which are not addressed through the I design nor through the implementation. Despite the persistence of outbreaks in hard-to-reach areas, which I mentioned before, and underserved communities, which really represent pockets of unimmunized, vulnerable, and high-risk groups. The overall findings highlighted here are that the threat to the urban centers is real, with large yellow fever outbreaks reported near and in these centers in the last years. Populations not reached by routine immunization, therefore those with existing immunity gaps, have really been at the epicenter of these outbreaks. And these include those who are difficult to reach or mobile populations who are typically missed in large-scale vaccination campaigns. I has tried to address these populations in part through piloting the subnational risk assessment tool. However, the rollout is pending. And the situation is further exacerbated as I partners are not seen as systematically sharing lessons learned and data systems. Next slide. Furthermore, despite the I partners having gender equity and human rights expertise within their organizations, for example, WHO IBB has a gender focal point, Gavi has a gender strategy, and their potential to actually share critical lessons learned in reaching vulnerable and marginalized populations. This is still not reflected in the I strategy design nor in implementation. And there's a notable lack of effort to develop tailored strategies to reach these high-risk groups. That said, there are important insights from country level, for example, in Ghana, where implementation research on nomadic communities and their movement patterns has been undertaken. And finally, the Gavi ZIP, which is investing large sums of money to provide vaccination services in complex environments, could provide lessons learned and be leveraged within the context of the I strategy implementation. Next slide. These findings led us to recommendation 4, which focuses on 3 essential actions, which include scaling up of subnational risk assessments, conducting immunization gap analyses and implementation research around hard to reach communities, and then developing tailored outreach strategies for these communities. So key to this recommendation, aside from the 3 essential actions, is the sharing of data and lessons learned between the organizations, developing tailored gender and equity responsive communication and outreach strategies, which are aligned with implementing catch-up campaigns at the country level, aligning with the Gavi ZIP in Africa, prioritizing further the peri-urban and urban areas for preparedness planning and catch-up campaigns, and introducing a standard agenda for gender equity and human rights at the annual I Partners meeting. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Maiken, now.
So next slide, please. For high-level finding 5, we found that I partners have complemented each other well and provided substantial coordination and support to implementation, but that integration and synergies could be further explored to have maximum impact. So some of the key findings under this high-level finding include that the leadership group, the PMG, and the working groups have had good coordination of partners' efforts, but there's room for closer coordination and complementarity, especially with teams working on BPDs, urban health, health system strengthening, and vector surveillance and control, and IHR going forward. There was a recent ad hoc IA 2030 task team, which was formed to look at opportunities for integrating I within IA 2030. And this report clearly stipulates some good opportunities that needs now to be prioritized for implementation. We also found that there was scope for more alignment with other key global initiatives, SDGs, UHC, GLI, and Gavi 5.0, and limited systems in place for data sharing between programs. And it will be important to leverage on the opportunities of Gavi and IA 2030 data strategy and digital health information strategy. Most importantly, maybe here is the critical challenges and gaps related to routine immunizations that are observed with declining trends and continued protracted suboptimal coverage levels through RI in most of the high-risk countries. And according to VUNIC data, we only had 5 of the 23 high-risk countries in Africa reaching the target of 80% coverage. In the Americas, only 3 of 12 reporting countries reached the coverage estimates of above 80%. Next slide, please. We further found that multi-antigen campaigns have been conducted by several high-risk countries recently, but there's been limited global guidance and sharing of lessons learned between countries. In relation to these multi-antigen campaigns, we found that there was an indication of lower coverage of these campaigns versus single antigen campaigns, but this needs to be explored more in depth and challenges addressed. There was also a declining trend of coverage overall for all PMVCs in the recent years. In relation to the multi-antigen campaigns, we also noted that Gavi doesn't cover additional operational costs that might be necessary for a multi-antigen versus single antigen campaign. We further found that catch-up vaccination for polio, measles, and other VPDs was an underutilized platform, as well as outbreak responses, which are often siloed. In relation to vector surveillance and control, we found good experience from the Americas, including systems and structures for risk modeling, coordination, research, etc. And the new GLI initiative will be important to fully leverage on. We noted a persistent risk of urban outbreaks with risk of international spread as a continuous threat. And the related critical activities of the ICE strategy are yet to fully kick off. Additionally, we noted limited effort so far on implementing across sectors beyond the health sector, but opportunities exist. And next slide, please. So this leads to recommendation 5, which is to improve integration and synergies for maximum impact by embedding relevant yellow fever activities into IA 2030 structures, while capitalizing on broader VPD surveillance and vaccination efforts, and at the same time increasing linkages to vector control programs and mapping other opportunities for multi-sectoral approaches. The sub-recommendations are to implement the identified opportunities from the recent IA 2030 task team report, to ensure that yellow fever is integrated in all relevant IA 2030 implementation efforts and roadmaps, as well as Gavi 5.0. And to strengthen yellow fever in routine immunization EPI programs in countries with low coverage or a coverage gap between MCV1 and yellow fever vaccines. Next slide, please. The next recommendations are on capitalizing activities and achievements of the ICE strategy implementation to strengthen RI, and leveraging catch-up vaccination effort by partners to close the yellow fever immunity gaps. Also, we find it's important to gather and analyze data and lessons learned from conducting the PMVCs and multi-antigen campaigns, and investigate the reasons for the declining coverage trends, and develop country guidance toolkits on conducting multi-antigen campaigns. We also would recommend to capitalize more on broader VPD surveillance and outbreak responses, for instance, for polio, measles, COVID-19, to close immunity gaps, and to tap into the experience from the Americas and GLI on research on vector surveillance and control and modeling, and providing rolling updates through the PMT. And we will also recommend to ensure strong linkages and synergies to the new GLI by ensuring representation in governance structures of GLI. Next slide, please. The final 2 sub-recommendations is to investigate opportunities of working across sectors, and to consider investments in innovations, including electronic immunization registries, etc. Next slide, please. So our high-level finding 6 is that despite significant progress on the eye, a fragile yellow fever vaccine supply still exists, and continued supply chain bottlenecks, inadequate surveillance, and outbreak response delays have been noted, mainly across African high-risk countries. So the key findings were that although we have seen a significantly increased vaccine supply, an example is that the UNICEF procured vaccines have increased by approximately 75% since eye strategy initiation. But there are indications of yellow fever vaccine supply shortages or fear of shortages, which are hindering some yellow fever interventions at subnational level or country level. We also noted a risk of potential vaccine supply shortages, a fragile situation to rely on one Russian-based vaccine manufacturer for 60% of all vaccines procured by UNICEF, and a potential increased global demand if we improve coverage rates and scale of PMVCs and RI over time, or if major outbreaks occur. And there's a generally high wasted rate for lyophilized vaccines, with also examples found for yellow fever, and it could be important to closely examine wastage rates more closely and use method to reduce wastage. We noted major progress in the African region on the time from onset of disease to confirmatory results, with the weakest link being transportation of samples from local level to national reference labs. And we also noted the complex diagnostic processes are still causing delays, especially in Africa. There are underutilized opportunities for building synergies with other programs to share cold chains, infrastructure, etc. Next slide, please. Continuing on a few bullets on the findings, the barriers to yellow fever surveillance comprised funding challenges, commodity supplies constraints, human resource capacity, inaccessible, hard to reach communities, and limited community engagement. And countries of the Americas have invested extensively in sophisticated yellow fever surveillance systems, which were important to ensure rapid response of the yellow fever outbreak in 2017, 2018 in Brazil, for instance. In Africa, we noted the response delays in 2021 and 2022, which were mainly attributed to the time between a notified case and the ICG request. And we noted that several revisions of the ICG request forms were needed, and countries have reported that requests were requiring detailed information which were not often available. Next slide, please. So going on to recommendation, in line with these findings, recommendation 6 is to continue efforts to ensure robust supply chains, including clear mitigation plans to address risk of inadequate vaccine supply, and improve attention to surveillance and coordination for improved detection and faster response to outbreaks. And the sub-recommendations are to develop a mitigation plan for continued steady supply of yellow fever vaccines through 2026 and beyond, to focus on continued barriers to rapid detection and response, including transportation of samples from local level to national reference labs, and accelerating the approval and rollout of novel yellow fever diagnostic tools. Next slide, please. And to enhance integration efforts for supply chain improvements by building on synergies with other programs and strategies. We also found it necessary to scale up community-based surveillance and coordinated multifaceted surveillance systems for a rapid response and prompt outbreak containment. And finally, assure good complementary actions and coordination between the Secretariat, outbreak countries, and outbreak response mechanisms of ICG. Next slide, please. So our high-level finding 7 is that limitations of the IMNE framework and monitoring of eye progress have presented a challenge to adequately adjust and course correct, and new research finding needs close monitoring. So our key findings are that the current IMNE framework has data gaps, baseline values missing, and some indicators are lacking, and milestones are generally not available. And there's generally a lack of disaggregated data, monitoring of disaggregated data, and several aspirational targets. And the IMNE dashboard has been a very successful investment with great data visualization, but there are missed opportunities for country involvement in it being not publicly available and without open access to country stakeholders. The MNE data is presented regularly to eye governing bodies, yet to the leadership group, mainly in aggregate and cross-sectional snapshot form. And the roadmap to implement the eye strategy in the Americas is still in a final form, but not endorsed. And the 16 eye strategic indicators, which are monitored through eye and through the dashboard, are often lacking data from the Americas. We also noted that documenting best practices and lessons learned has not been sufficiently prioritized, but that the eye Secretariat is working on a learning strategy, which will hopefully address this concern. Finally, we found that new research findings related to the recommended level of vaccine coverage, possible waning immunity, and adverse effects are warranted for closer reflection in the strategy. Next slide, please. So our recommendation 7 is to revise the IMNE framework and its monitoring approach before mid-2023 and address new research findings to guide and adapt implementation. And ensuring data from the Americas is monitored through the selected eye strategic indicator in the eye dashboard, presenting MNE trend data systematically to eye governance structures, refining the MNE dashboard to show progress against strategic indicators in the country dashboards that do exist in the prototype. Ensure that MNDE data drives action on its public access of the dashboard. Finalize and disseminate the learning strategy and monitor new research findings and continuously consider updating targets and approaches of the strategy. Next slide. So this is our final high-level finding that we want to present and related recommendation today. The high-level finding 8 is around sustainability. So we noted that sustainability concerns prevail with the scope for improved complementarity with other interventions, partners, and initiatives. The key findings related to sustainability were that there's been significant reliance on external support for yellow fever response, especially in Africa, which remains and threatens sustainability of ongoing efforts. And the current eye engagement strategy, which is a funding and advocacy strategy, doesn't spell out how countries are going to exit from external support over time. Also, several yellow fever high-risk countries are planning to transition out of Gavi support in the future, and this needs careful attention. And as much as primary healthcare and system strengthening is the basis for IA 2030, we didn't find the same emphasis in the eye strategy. And we also noted that preventive mass vaccination campaign has been postponed in many high-risk countries due to competing priorities, and the fact that at present Gavi has co-financing requirements only for RI and not for PMVCs. Countries who are currently categorized as moderate or low risk for yellow fever have not recently been assessed for yellow fever risk levels, despite an increase in the yellow fever vector distribution worldwide and climate change, which will be important going forward. So going on to recommendation 8. Next slide. Our final recommendation is to develop a 3-year eye transition and sustainability framework for the period 2024 to 2026 to prepare for the end of the eye strategy by 2026. So given if the recommendations that we are providing here are addressed, if human resources are really scaled up, if advocacy efforts are invested and over the next years, we do think it's possible to start looking at the end of the eye strategy by 2026, despite the challenges that persist. And this requires planning, and that includes developing a resource mobilization plans for yellow fever interventions, embedding relevant yellow fever activities within IA 2030 and planning for that, which is detailed here, and preparing for integration of additional eye activities into other activities, and assessing the possible need and resource implications of a continued sort of eye light strategy, which could be considered beyond 2026 for certain eye activities, which could include emergency outbreak response, work with industry, private sector, risk modeling, etc., which could need a continued vertical focus beyond 2026. Next slide, please. And the final few recommendations. sub-recommendations is to sharpen the country planning and forecasting to address the number of countries that are transitioning out of Gavi support. To develop strategies to consolidate ownership of yellow fever interventions at country level, which is linked to previous recommendations. To consider incentives to accelerate the completion of the planned PMBCs, since they seem to be postponed all the time, for instance, by issuing of co-financing requirements for PMBCs undertaking after 2026. And as a final sub-recommendation, to revisit the list of the 40 high-risk countries based on risk assessment and definition of moderate risk countries. So with that, I think we've spent our 30 minutes, and we would like to mention that we have, as an evaluation team, tried to prioritize all of these recommendations in the report. But we also think it's important for the partners to discuss prioritization between themselves. So we wouldn't present that today, but you could look out for that in the report when that arrives at your desk. Thank you so much, and thank you for your attention.
And thank you both. That's certainly a lot of information. I don't know how you fit it into 30 minutes, but that's impressive. We will have the occasion to go through some of these recommendations tomorrow. There'll be some group work around these, the evaluation, but we only have Michelle and Maiken today with us. So if there are any burning questions for them, please raise your hand. I see we have a question from Christopher. Go ahead, Christopher.
Okay, thank you very much for the elaborate presentation. So my question is on the integration, which has been elaborated on so much. So for me, I think for routine immunization, integration is not really a problem. When it comes to campaigns, that is where the challenge is. So primarily, you will notice that sometimes these antigens, the delivery methods or modes differ. Again, the target populations may also differ. So operationally, it becomes a very big challenge. If it is financial cost, it is helpful, but most times combining these approaches may lead to substandard or poor quality vaccination exercises. So I want to know, are there some instances or examples of countries that have successfully integrated these vaccination interventions, especially for campaigns that have yielded good quality vaccination coverage? Otherwise, it's quite challenging in the operational setting for some of these things. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will try to respond to your question. And thank you so much. This is in line with our evaluation findings as well, that it's been quite challenging for countries to embark on multi and dual antigen campaigns. And there's a need for some global guidance as well as sharing of lessons learned between countries. So that's a very important comment. And what we did find was that there are some examples of successful campaigns, but if you look, for instance, at Nigeria, you also see that they have conducted multi-antigen campaigns in recent years, and you also see a declining coverage rate in Nigeria. Whether this is due to the fact that it's a multi-antigen campaign or whether there are other factors playing in, that hasn't been really studied in detail. But there is a report that has come out from Nigeria which can show lessons learned and also what needs to be taken into consideration when conducting multi-antigen campaigns. And we had also conducted a case country study in Ghana, where they have combined a COVID-19 campaign with a yellow fever reactive campaign recently, which also had some good learnings on what should be considered, and how it is possible, but it also has, there's some requirements that needs to be considered before you can embark on these multi-antigen campaigns. I hope that replies to your question, and I think we're hoping for the Secretariat and the partners to take on our recommendations to have countries share implementation experience with each other and documenting best practices and lessons learned. as well as some global guidance on the pitfalls and the opportunities and how to address this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I see we have Gift next.
Okay, thank you for that question, Chris. Just to add up to what our presenter has made, especially an example on Nigeria. We had several campaign integrated, like measles and yellow fever, which I was part of it. And we saw that it was very effective. And also, we even used that opportunity to implement the zero-dose strategy by Gavi. And we saw that because we used different strategies like fixed post, mobile team, and we're able to reach out to parents to give yellow fever. So, because many persons are aware of the house-to-house strategy that was implemented for measles, so they were really waiting for people, if team could also come to their houses to give them yellow fever and all that. But we now saw that implementing this integrated campaign was really, really effective than just planning for measles or just planning for yellow fever or meningitis. So it's really a good approach where we can use to strengthen even the routine immunization, especially on zero-dose children that have been missed. So the preventive mass campaign or in reactive mass campaign, it being integrated with other vaccines is really a good approach. Well, we also saw example with integration of this campaign with COVID-19. It increased the uptake of people who were vaccinated for COVID-19 because we had some people who were reluctant to take COVID-19 vaccination, but because we integrated this three campaign alongside, there was an increase in uptake of the COVID-19 vaccination. So I really think integration is one of the very best way we can use to increase the people who have not been reached, both for zero dose. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Would you all like to add anything to that? I didn't hear a question. I suppose it's a remark more. If not, we have a hand up from Miriam.
Yes, thank you. And thank you to all the presenters. My name is Miriam. I'm vaccination advisor for MSF Médecins Sans Frontières and ICG executive member. I would like to share with you that we have quite a lot of experience doing multi-antigen campaigns, both preventive and reactive in humanitarian settings. And we are open and ready to share this experience. We have worked with different Ministry of Health in South Sudan, in Syria, in Nigeria, so in Ethiopia. So we are ready to share in Congo, Central African Republic. But anyway, there is a framework that has been published by WHO. This is an international policy where you can have a look, and that can help you to decide which antigens should be included in any multi-antigen campaign according to the risk evaluation. And there is also implementation guidance from WHO. This is not only, it's not a MSF experience with a specific Ministry of Health, but there is a framework. Also, after the first and second wave of COVID, WHO has published a policy to recover and restore vaccination activities with a special focus in children, zero dose and under-immunized children. This policy is from November 2020. It's not very operational, we can say. It's what we have to do, but it doesn't give us clear instruction on how to do it. No? But it's also advising to take any opportunity, reactive campaign, supplementary immunization activities, preventive campaign in emergencies to go multi-antigen and to include as many preventive activities you can do. To recover all these activities that has not been done or it was impossible to do during the COVID time. So just to offer that we are ready to share our experience if someone is interested, but as the countries I have mentioned, we have worked with the Ministry of Health, so they can also have the same experience than us. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. It's really helpful to hear all these perspectives. It really adds dimension to this discussion. We're running out of time, as you all know. We're a good 30 minutes behind. Our interpreters have to leave, so apologies for that. We'll have to help each other out in translating. I understand that the next session we have a bilingual speaker, so hopefully he can help us out informally as friends. But before we get to that, I'll just invite Rakhi to come in and explain a bit about the breakout sessions tomorrow.
Okay, thank you, Shagun. There will be a slide up shortly explaining how you can book yourselves onto 3 breakout sessions that we have tomorrow related to the recommendations from the midterm evaluation. So Matteo, if you wouldn't mind putting those instructions up. There is a link that we will share shortly, and I will send an email to everybody after the meeting ends today, which will allow you to choose one of the 3 breakout sessions. You can do that this evening. You can also choose a breakout session just shortly before the breakout sessions. We will show you how to do that tomorrow. And if you don't choose a breakout session, you will remain in the main room. So, Matteo, could we share the link in the chat with everyone? It will take about 60 seconds for you to choose your breakout room for tomorrow. I will send further instructions in writing. I don't want to spend too much time now because I know we have to go to our very engaging panel discussion. So thank you, Shagun. Over to you.
Thank you. There'll be a link in the chat shortly that you can click on to choose your breakout session. So thank you. With that, we come to the last session for today, which is going to be moderated by Modibo Kasoge from UNICEF. So thank you, Modibo. I understand the discussion is on some of the key countries, what are known as no-regret countries. Over to you to introduce the session and the speakers.
Thank you, Shagun. Hello, everybody. You guys got me to be standing between people and the rush hour and supper. But in any case, we have to get the work done. So I'm pleased really to be chairing this session in my capacity as a UNICEF immunization specialist and also a member of the iStrategy program management group. It is about a discussion with 3 eminent panelists from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. These are 3 no-regret countries. As you know, they happen to be priority countries because of some vulnerabilities having to do with the high risk and the high population and low population immunity. So we'll be engaging with them on questions that have already been shared. And if time allowed, I'll probe a little bit and allow the audience to have a couple of questions, that is, if time permits, really. So let's start with the first panelist. I believe it's Mesret. Okay, so it's Nigeria. I understand Dr. Bassey couldn't make it, and he's represented by his colleague, Hassan, who is the lead of outbreak response division within the Primary Healthcare Development Agency. Hassan's question would be about integration. It's not so much about asking Nigeria whether they know how to integrate or whether they'll do it, but perhaps more about how would they improve it. So Hassan would entertain us on how they were able to find space for yellow fever in the program as well as funding sources at country level. Oh, okay. Go ahead. Is this Dr. Bassey?
Yeah, Dr. Bassey is around.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, you guys have decided to be together. Go ahead, please. Dr. Bassey, let me just remind everybody, is a good friend of mine. He is the Director of Disease Control and Immunization in the Primary Healthcare Development Agency. Over to you, Dr. Bassey. Dr. Bassey, you are not yet audible.
No, Dr. Bassey didn't join. Sorry about that.
Okay, so it's got to be Hassan then. Is Hassan around? Well, in the interest of time,
yes, yes, I'm around. I'm around.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Hassan, thank you very much. Thank you very
well,
much for stepping in.
Yes, as I've just like what you have said, you are aware that Nigeria have started integration of yellow fever, not just of recent. I think the first integration we did was 2020, where we integrated with Men A in Anambra State, and it was successful. This year, we have now increased the number of programs that we're integrating with yellow fever SIA. Like now we are integrating with other programs like the polio, the polio group, program, COVID-19, also have been integrated with yellow fever SIA. Also, we have the vitamin A supplementation and also the BAT registration. As I've said, for integration, I think from the lesson learned, we have seen that it's doable, but it requires a very good planning. And this integration cut across all the thematic areas, starting from planning and coordination, including the micro planning for all the program, for all the working groups, the program officer for all intervention are involved and are part of the working group. The micro planning, as I've said, in Nigeria, we're done together, we're integrated together so that we have a common template and to see how we can plan for implementation. Integration also under ACSM, that's advocacy, social mobilization. All these also were integrated for the intervention. And I have said the cold chain and logistics, because we are like for the COVID-19 and yellow fever now, you know, they all require additional fast cold chain equipment. All this were brought together. We started together to see what we need, and all this were also integrated, including the vaccine movement. The training also were integrated in such a way that we don't have different training for different programs. We have training modules, and the slides that were developed are all for the different intervention that we integrated, including the personnel in such a way that, like I give example of COVID-19 and the SIA team. The two were trained together for either COVID-19 and the SIA antigen that they are going to provide, the yellow fever, and all of them administer all the vaccine. And with this, we also try to do a kind of immunization in the budgeting in such a way that there won't be any double payment for personnel. So you are paid once, you don't have opportunity to receive twice of what is you're entitled to. For data management, as I've said, all these also are integrated. The same data manager were the one that are collecting and analyzing the data. And this is presented to all the stakeholders daily. The review meeting that is part of the best practice we do at all levels. All the program also were reviewed together. We don't have different review for each of the intervention, also including the supervision. Somebody have said also, we also use the opportunity of this integration to also implement the seed drop plan, where we try to reach out to children in identify settlement with high number of unimmunized children. This is where we are in Nigeria, and I think, as I've said, integration is doable, and the resources are, because as in Nigeria now, we have a slogan, or what we call one country, one plan, and one budget, such a way that for what we are doing is is together. We don't have different things for different programs. I think this is where I can stop. I think my director is here, and also my colleagues, whether my director also will add to what I've said. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Hassan. Your director would be kind enough to wait for questions, if any. In the interest of time, we will move on to the next presenter. I might come back to you for a probing question having to do with how much of a coordination or improvement of a coordination mechanism would be needed to be successful in this integration aspect of our work. Thank you very much for the time being. I should get back to you. You can move on to the next question. So the next panelist is Dr. Eme Sikomola, is the director of the expanded program of immunization in the Ministry of Health. So his question is about how to expand and diversify the eye governance structures and partnership, including beyond the fraternity of eye into more staff members of the ministry, including community health, social, civil society organization, if possible. So let us hear from our colleagues from DRC.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I will speak in French. Mon pays, la RDC, en fait, a adhéré à la stratégie d'élimination des épidémies de la fièvre jaune depuis 2017 à Abuja. À ce jour, il faut dire que nous avons réussi à vacciner beaucoup d'enfants en renforçant les PEF de routine à travers le plan Machako et les campagnes préventives fièvre jaune. Nous avons réussi depuis 2020-2021 à vacciner plus de 18 millions de Congolais âgés de 6 mois à 60 ans. Et on a renforcé également la surveillance contre la fièvre jaune et le laboratoire. Il est vraiment important qu'on élargisse la gouvernance à d'autres acteurs, notamment d'autres acteurs du secteur, des acteurs de la société civile, etc. Alors, nous devons dire que très récemment, nous avons pu actualiser notre plan. On a revu le plan stratégique d'élimination des épidémies de la fièvre jaune au pays. Et cela nous a ouvert une opportunité pour élargir notre coordination à plusieurs autres structures qui luttent contre les maladies dans le secteur de la santé. Et nous avons remonté la coordination à un plus haut niveau de la hiérarchique, donc au niveau de la Direction générale de lutte contre les maladies. Et dans ce comité, nous retrouvons la Direction des surveillances épidémiologiques, nous retrouvons le programme élargi de vaccination dont je suis responsable. Nous retrouvons le programme national de l'hygiène aux frontières. Nous retrouvons le programme national de communication et de la promotion en faveur de la vaccination. Nous retrouvons également le laboratoire national, donc l'INRB, l'Institut national de recherche biomédicale, ainsi que l'École de santé publique. Alors, il faut retenir qu'avant la révision de ce plan qui nous a permis d'élargir la participation à la coordination à tous ces acteurs, il faut dire qu'avant cela, on s'est limité juste à travailler avec la direction de surveillance épidémiologique et les programmes élargis de vaccination. Donc, à ce niveau-là, je pense que nous avons pu élargir au niveau national, au niveau sectoriel, aux autres acteurs. Il est important également d'élargir à la société civile. Donc, les organisations de société civile vont prendre part également à cette coordination. Retenons que nous avons des opportunités qui ont fait que par le passé, nous puissions travailler avec les organisations de société civile. C'est en effet la mise en œuvre de la subvention RSS, donc renforcement du système de santé. Là, nous travaillons avec les organisations de société civile à travers notre partenaire SANRU. Nous travaillons également avec ces organisations dans la mise en œuvre de la vaccination contre le COVID. Et nous travaillons là, dedans, nous voyons effectivement les confessions religieuses, les organisations non gouvernementales à tous les niveaux. Il faut dire également un autre atout, c'est le fait que ces organisations de société civile sont présentes au niveau opérationnel. Même au cours des campagnes de vaccination contre la fièvre jaune, les campagnes préventives que nous avons organisées, les sociétés civiles sont capitalisées. Donc, il nous est très facile qu'ils soient intégrés au niveau national et infranational dans la coordination. Cela nous permet effectivement d'aller vite dans l'atteinte des objectifs qui sont assignés par notre plan stratégique d'élimination des épidémies de fièvre jaune. Donc, il est très important que les pays intègrent d'autres organisations dans la coordination afin que nous puissions obtenir l'appropriation notamment de la communauté et de tous les secteurs santé par rapport à ce plan d'élimination des épidémies de la fièvre jaune. Je vous remercie.
Okay, merci bien, Dr. Aimé. Well, let me just quickly try to translate what he said in French. Basically, they sees an opportunity of revision of a strategic plan for disease control, basically to expand as far as coordination is concerned. Initially, there used to be between disease surveillance and EPI doing everything there is about yellow fever. But thanks to that process of revision, so we're able to extend it to the surveillance unit and immunization additional, the border hygiene and communication and national laboratory. So it was also an opportunity for them to expand it, the civil society organization, tapping onto a grant probably that was in place for health system and strengthening, and as well as COVID response as we all had to face. It was also a good opportunity for them to include religious organizations. Not only did they expand coordination to other diseases, they're also able to pitch it at a higher level in the hierarchy, which as we all know, would facilitate a few things around. So this is for a translation from what Eme has shared with us. We can now move on to the next panelist. I see there is a question from Gilda. I would ask you to please hold on a bit so that we can go around the panelists and then provide that opportunity of questions. Next panelist, please.
Hi, Mudibo. I believe there's somebody from Ethiopia online. There was a chat. Would they like to join this discussion? Dr. Melkamu? We see he's connected. Would you like to join the discussion? Is he unmuted?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I faced some difficulties to unmute my mic. That's why I delayed. First, I would like to ask apology for not present. Our director, Dr. Masarat, couldn't attend this meeting due to other competing priorities. So I'm available as API manager delegate. So if there is anything that is related with Ethiopia, I can address, and I can also say something on the preparations of yellow fever vaccine introduction in Ethiopia and what has been done yet. So we appreciate what's being done by the High Secretariat and other partners in elimination yellow fever pandemic, endemic. So we know that it's clear that Ethiopia is at high risk of yellow fever, and understanding this, we have tried to do many things on the preparation of introduction of yellow fever. And again, yellow fever is one of the immediately reportable diseases in Ethiopia as part of its integrated disease surveillance and response. In addition to that, it is known that Ethiopia is affected by series of outbreaks up to starting from 1960 to 2020, and a series of reactive campaigns were conducted as a response for this outbreak. The other thing, vaccination for travelers is being provided, and the comprehensive preventive measures in integration with malaria and other arboviral diseases were also implemented. As a preparation for the routine vaccine introduction, we included it in our strategic plan in CMYP to introduce the vaccine. And there are also some trials and in evidence generation activity. For example, we have in the previous year, the last year, we have conducted a sub-national risk assessment to generate sub-national evidences on the risk level, and we are also conducting vaccine introduction modalities, whether it is subnational or national or phase-based. So our National Research Advisory Committee is working on that. So currently we are preparing for that, and we are preparing to conduct dissemination workshops on these two assessments. So after we look on these evidences, we will decide when and how to introduce the vaccine. So yet, if even though we have tried to introduce this vaccine, we know that we are delayed to introduce the vaccine due to other competing priorities in the country, which includes conflict, COVID-19 pandemic, drought, flooding, and locust devastation. So due to this, we can't introduce it yet, but we are ready to learn from other countries.
Yeah. Yes,
So
Dr.
if there is if there is anything that can you raise about Ethiopia, I can reflect on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayalem. It looks like a lot is going on. If you could take 1 minute to entertain us about relaunching of the initiative. You know, yellow fever is a disease that we have been living with for so many decades. It's nothing new. The initiative has been around, so but usually it goes dormant at some point. So we want to rekindle interest in the disease as well as political will. If you could touch upon those in a couple of words, please. How are you going to about relaunching that initiative?
Yeah, we appreciate the idea of relaunching this initiative. And actually, I may not be the right person to talk about the political will, but technical person. But from Ethiopia side, as I clearly said, out of the competing priorities where we are ready, and it needs high-level advocacy to get political will. this is what I can say, but I'm not the right person for that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ayelem. I appreciate your time. Let me go back to Dr. Bassey. Dr. Bassey, are you still around? Dr. Bassey, are you still around? Aimé, vous êtes là?
Oui, je suis là.
Voilà, Aimé, je voudrais que
Yes,
vous nous dites...
I'm around.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess it's Hassan who's gonna
Yes.
talk on behalf of Nigeria. Hassan, would you please tell us a word or two about how you would go about strengthening coordination in order for this integration that we are so dearly attached to becomes a success in Nigeria in terms of improvement, not so much about trying really, because we know what's going on. Over to you in a few words, please.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Modibo. Just like what you have said, coordination. I think for Nigeria, what we were likely to do is just to see how to increase the time of meeting. Already in place, we have coordination headed by. I mean, as I said the other time, all the thematic areas from planning, coaching, and what have you have to do with any integration we want to do. We are all the program officer as part of all these coordination. And we have the steering committee, which is headed by the executive directors and also other partners, where we also give them updates, regular updates, where they also give us guidance on how to go about the integration. So I think that's what I can say. We increase regular meeting and following up with any observation before implementation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shehu. Aimé, vous êtes là?
Je suis là.
Voilà, est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler un peu de ce que vous envisagez faire par rapport à une amélioration de la coordination afin que l'initiative d'expansion du système de gouvernance soit une réussite? So I'm asking colleagues, Aimé, what DRC is planning to do vis-à-vis improved coordination mechanisms so that the plan to expand coordination structures become more useful. Challenges are known about coordination in many countries, as we know. How is he gonna do that tweak, making it successful through improved coordination mechanisms? Allez-y, Aimé.
OK, merci beaucoup. Je pense effectivement que nous avons plusieurs intervenants dans notre système de santé. Toutes les parties prenantes par le passé n'étaient pas au courant du plan d'élimination des épidémies de fièvre jaune, ne participaient pas, mais nous voulons que toutes ces parties prenantes, tous ces partenaires, tous ces intervenants qui contribuent à la vaccination des maladies à prévention vaccinale puissent être mis à profit pour renforcer l'élimination de la fièvre jaune. Donc, ça ne sera pas très, très compliqué. Il sera juste question de capitaliser les intervenants dans le système de vaccination en faveur de toutes les maladies et les capitaliser effectivement pour la fièvre jaune. Donc, nous allons aussi le faire aussi bien au niveau national qu'au niveau infranational, donc au niveau des provinces, au niveau des zones de santé et jusqu'au niveau opérationnel.
OK. Allez, merci bien, Aimé. Colleagues, in a nutshell, it's about trying to bring about awareness among immunization partners, really, for decision to go into expanding the coordination structures. To him requires more sensitization and to capitalize on existing efforts of partners within the space, not only at the national level, but also at the decentralized level. So Dr. Emmett doesn't seem to really be overwhelmed with the difficulty that coordination might entail vis-a-vis yellow fever, because the structures are already there. So it's more about capitalization towards yellow fever. Merci bien, Aimé. C'est très gentil. Now let us try to get a question or two from the audience. I remember there was a hand up. I don't recall the name anymore. If you can please go ahead with your one question before we call it a session. Over to you. Yeah, Gilda, that was it. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Merci. En fait, j'aimerais parler en français parce que ma question s'adresse directement à Dr Aimé Sikomola de la DRC. En fait, il était question de coordination. Et donc, du coup, je voulais faire une suggestion. Ce n'est pas une question, mais c'est une suggestion que je ne sais pas si Dr Aimé est au courant des approches multisectorielles qui sont de plus en plus en vogue actuellement quand il s'agit de lutter contre les maladies à transmission vectorielle ou de les éliminer. Donc, parce qu'en fait, les approches multisectorielles, comme vous le savez déjà, en fait, regroupent que ce soit en fait, tous les secteurs du gouvernement, les secteurs clés, bien sûr, les secteurs privés et aussi les partenaires de développement. Donc, je ne sais pas si Dr Aimé est au courant, sinon TDA a développé en 2020 ce qu'on appelle un conceptual framework sur les approches multisectorielles qui sont appliquées aux maladies à transmission vectorielle, notamment le paludisme, en fait, mais aussi les arboviroses. Donc, ça pourrait être une solution justement pour la DRC, qui est quand même un grand pays que je connais bien, en fait, parce que j'ai travaillé aussi là-bas. Donc, pour la question de coordination nationale, moi, je pense que ce qu'il vous faudra en République démocratique du Congo, c'est l'établissement d'une task force nationale. Et cette task force nationale, en fait, va avoir comme mission spéciale en fait, de lutter contre ou de travailler sur l'élimination de la fièvre jaune et placer directement en fait, sous la présidence sous le tutelle en fait, de la présidence de la DRC. Parce que en fait, il a été démontré en fait, dans d'autres parties, dans d'autres régions du monde, justement, que lorsque les task forces justement, sont directement sous la présidence, il y a de plus en plus, il y a une meilleure coordination et les activités en fait, sont suivies aussi sur le terrain comme il le faut. Voilà, ce serait tout. Merci, c'était une suggestion.
C'est ça. Merci bien, Gilda. J'espère que j'ai bien prononcé votre nom. Well, colleague,
oui, c'est ça.
So, colleagues, Gilda had 2 points. One is to bring to the attention of our friend Aimé the fact that there is a conceptual framework for multi-sectoral approach to vectorial disease transmission. So that would be for Aimé to respond to. The second is more of a suggestion, namely to put in place a national task force under the leadership of a president of the country. You know, apparently everybody knows how much weight the presidency would have in anything going on at the country level. Alors donc, Aimé, vous avez bien pris note des questions. Allez-y alors.
OK, merci beaucoup, Gilda, pour ces propositions. En tout cas, je suis d'avis qu'une approche multisectorielle est efficace. Cependant, les approches multisectorielles, effectivement, doivent être ramenées à un niveau hiérarchique beaucoup plus élevé, soit au niveau de la primature, donc c'est le Premier ministre qui coordonne, soit au niveau de la présidence. En effet, c'est une démarche. C'est une démarche et on peut profiter des opportunités telles que le Forum national en faveur de la vaccination et l'éradication de la poliomyélite, qui a été lancé par le chef de l'État en 2019. Et pour le moment, on évalue chaque année. Je crois cette année, l'année 2023, on pourra organiser un forum pour évaluer, mais c'est plus en faveur de la vaccination de routine. Donc, on voudrait plutôt mettre un accent sur la vaccination de routine, que créer des structures, des task force pour telle ou telle autre maladie. Je crois que là, également, ça crée des articulations du système. Mais je crois que c'est des discussions qu'on pourra mener à notre niveau. Parce que pour nous, l'idée, c'est d'avoir une intégration pour capitaliser l'existant et surtout renforcer le PV, la vaccination de routine, la vaccination systématique. Yeah. Il y a par exemple une approche multisectorielle dans la lutte contre le choléra que nous avons mis à la responsabilité du ministère du Plan. Et on a développé un plan multisectoriel d'élimination du choléra. Peut-être qu'on peut en arriver là également. Le plan multisectoriel d'élimination de la fièvre jaune, bon, c'est question que le groupe de travail avec lequel nous travaillons par rapport à la lutte contre la fièvre jaune puisse développer des arguments efficaces pour obtenir l'implication de la haute hiérarchie, telle que le Premier ministre par rapport à la mise en place d'un organe multisectoriel par rapport à la lutte contre la fièvre jaune. Mais je vous informe déjà que le chef de l'État, il a en main le renforcement de la vaccination de routine dans le cadre du plan Machako. Je vous remercie.
D'accord. Merci bien, Aimé. Colleagues, it's getting late. Let me quickly try to wrap this up so we conclude. Basically, Aimé is open to any idea of multi-sectoral work. As a matter of fact, in DRC, they do have a cholera multi-sectoral strategy, and it's definitely a possibility to extend that to yellow fever. To him, the idea is not so much about any door being closed, but it's just about making the case and reaching out to the high leadership for they have already shown interest in routine immunization. So it's just about tweaking the message and rekindling some interest in the hierarchy to do that. And finally, the President of the Republic is quite interested in making some stride in anything having to do with multisectorality vis-a-vis the Plan Machako, which has been in place in DRC for so many years. So let me just thank our panel members. Merci bien, Aimé, de votre participation. Thank you, Hassan, my brother, Dr. Bassi, if you're still around. And thank you, our colleague from Ethiopia. We really do appreciate your time and your contribution. So let me just stop here and pass the floor back to our colleagues from the Secretariat. Over to you.
Thank you, Modibo, not just for the very interesting discussion, but also for helping us all follow it. So thanks a lot for that. With that, that's the end of our day today. It's been a really rich discussion, so good luck to the people who have to summarize this for tomorrow. But we'll see you tomorrow at 3 p.m. Geneva time. So the same time as you joined today. We'll see you then. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Hassan, well done.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that.
Thank you very much, colleagues, and well done. Merci beaucoup pour cette participation intéressante. À demain.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.